Hey guys, and welcome back to another sleep video. Now, for those who haven't tuned in one before, I always give a little disclaimer where I basically say that this is essentially a compilation of my short form videos I've previously released on the channel. So if anything ever sounds a little outdated or out of context, that's why. It shouldn't affect the plays within as they exist in a vacuum, but it is at least worth acknowledging. I hope you enjoy, and have a good night's rest. There are a few things in MLB that are certain, but one of the more obvious ones is the productivity behind robbing a homer. After all, other kinds of elite defensive plays don't necessarily correlate one-to-one with saved runs, a lot of times more so being an indirect effect spread out over a long term. But robbed homers are exact. If you take one away with a guy on first, for example, you save 2 runs, and so on in every other circumstance. And so, it's with this being said, I think that we can tangibly argue that the greatest defensive performance in the history of the sport occurred yesterday, because we saw a player take away 3 certain runs in such a fashion, and in a 1-run game no less. Joe Adell was in right field versus the Mariners, getting his day started with an absolutely amazing catch on the second batter of the ballgame, when he took away Cal Raleigh's first home run of the season with an outstanding leaping catch over the wall, 370 feet from home plate. An excellent example of nearly perfect timing in regards to his jump. And his team used this momentum to immediately score a run of their own, with Zach Neto leading off the bottom of the first with a 443-foot nuclear blast to left field, nearly clearing the bullpen out there. The Angels shortstop certainly has a special skill set, and it's been on full display in the early days of 2026. Unfortunately, Anaheim would strand a runner at third when Nolan Shanwell got thrown out trying to advance on what would have been a wild pitch, keeping things tight. Nice play by Cal there, by the way. From here, some excellent pitching would take over, with the 6'7" Jack Kokonowitz, who was the worst starter in baseball last year, having one of the best starts of his entire career, going on to strike out 7 batters over 5 2/3 scoreless innings. On the flip side, Emerson Hancock, the Mariners starter, outside of that Neto blast, didn't give up anything either, going 6 2/3 innings of 1-run ball with 5 strikeouts, helping him to establish a ridiculous ERA through his first 2 starts of 0.71. And that was pretty much the sum total of notable moments going into the 8th, with a couple of small jams here and there being worked out of, but with truly nothing to script. It was in this frame, however, that we would see our second ridiculous Adell catch, when Josh Naylor crushed a middle-cut slider 368 feet to right field, sending Joe back, and then, in another moment of perfect timing, leaping at the last second to rob his second long ball of the night. If you're keeping track, that's 2 runs directly that he took away from the Mariners, which obviously would have put them on top in this one. Already a ridiculous feat. After another unproductive bottom of the 8th, Anaheim looked to Jordan Romano to close things out. But on the very first batter he faced, J.P. Crawford would launch a breaking ball to right field, sending Adell 342 feet to the corner, where he leaped, this time directly over the wall, to not only grab it, but fall into the crowd in the process, before holding up his catch for everyone to see while still in the stands. This would be challenged to determine if he had left the playing field before he secured it, but much to the chagrin of Seattle fans everywhere, it indeed stood, making it the first time we had ever seen a player rob as many as 3 home runs in one game, a defensive feat that I think you could make a reasonable case is the greatest in the history of the sport, especially when you consider the context that this was a 1-0 game, a score that would be officially crystallized 2 batters later when Leo Rivas struck out. For all the crap that Angels fans have had to deal with in the last 15 years, it was certainly nice to see them get a chance to witness something truly historic, that we indeed may never see again on an MLB field. Errors are going to happen for every MLB player at some point, regardless of your position, but I think I can speak for most MLB fans when I say that this, in and of itself, isn't what's extremely frustrating. After all, everyone makes mistakes. It's more so when players are mentally lazy out there, and we just got a prime example of this yesterday, when a pitcher literally made one of the dumber looking miscues you'll ever see, largely as a product of acting so casual after it happened. The White Sox were taking on the Orioles in a thin 2-2 ball game in the 5th inning, with up to this point 2 runs being scored by each team in the 2nd and 3rd innings, with the Chi Sox getting theirs on RBI singles from Dustin Harris and Luis Angel Acuna, and Baltimore receiving a run-scoring double from Taylor Ward and ensuing ground out from Adley Rutschman. On to our highlighted play, Kyle Bradish delivered his 90th pitch of the afternoon, a 3-2 sinker to Colson Montgomery inside, walking the bases loaded. Or, at least, that's what would have happened had he managed to secure Adley's toss back to the mound, which he didn't, allowing it to go off his mitt and then trickle far enough behind the pitcher's mound to allow base runner Chase Mydroth to race towards the plate, scoring when Bradish made a wild throw, which then allowed both base runners to move up as well, even if the play at second was close. Just look at this replay. Not catching it's one thing, which is already embarrassing, but having zero urgency with a runner on third while going to grab it is just truly inexcusable. And then, of course, because he had to rush a throw, it was offline, further compounding the issue. I do want to give a shout out to Mydroth here as well. If he isn't paying full attention, that play probably doesn't happen, with his hustle being exactly what forced the issue. This is certainly going to go down as a major lowlight by year's end. Fortunately for the Orioles, this would not end up being a game-losing mistake, as they would manage to take the lead in the very next frame on a pass ball from catcher Reese McGuire and sacrifice fly from Dylan Beavers, eventually tacking on one more in the ninth on another RBI double from Taylor Ward, who started the season with his hair on fire, batting nearly .400 with an OPS over 1,000. Rico Garcia would then manage to secure his first career save in the bottom half, inducing a groundout off the bat of Montgomery to put the finishing touches on a series sweep of Chicago. One of my favorite parts of the new ABS system is getting a chance to see some of the umpires we've had to endure for an extremely long time get a little taste of their own medicine, having to suffer some embarrassment instead of our own teams and players having to deal with the consequences of their bad calls. And that's at least partially what we got a chance to feast our eyes on yesterday when CB Buckner had 6 of his calls overturned in one game, though, rest assured, he still got a chance to insert his negative impact in there as well. I'm going to take you through the contest itself as well as each challenge. The game began in about as cartoonish a way as possible, with Eugenio Suarez dribbling this ball on a 3-2 to Sonny Gray, who fielded it and with a runner on third proceeded to run towards the plate, stumble a little bit, and then just flip the ball into the back of base runner Matt McLain. That's going to go on some blooper reels at year's end. It was in the bottom of the second that we would get a chance to see our first challenge for the Red Sox, one they would not win, when Carlos Narvaez was off by less than an inch on what would have been strike 3 to Jose Trevino. Funny enough, one pitch later, he was indeed called out on an offering that really wasn't all that close, but the Reds didn't burn one of their own. By the time that frame concluded, it was 3-0, with Matt McLain crushing a 111-mile-per-hour line drive double to the left center field gap with 2 outs. Our first overturn would come nearly immediately after, in the top of the third, when Roman Anthony in a 2-1 count got this strike reversed to a ball, in what would be CB's biggest miss of the day, as that was nearly 3 inches off the zone. Unfortunately for Boston, this is when disaster would strike, as Anthony would attempt to challenge the very next pitch, a sinker that ended up being upheld by 0.1 inches. This meant that for the rest of the game, they would not be able to challenge, a fact that would come back to bite them multiple times throughout this contest. We'd have to wait another 3 innings for our next instance of ABS, with quite a few terrible calls being made in the meantime, including this one against Trevor Story with 2 outs and a 3-2 count and runner on second. As for the game itself, the Reds would get a couple runs on homers from Sal Stewart and Ellie De La Cruz, and Boston would register 3 of their own, with a long ball and an earlier at-bat from Story, an RBI single from Roman Anthony, and a wild pitch from Brady Singer. Hopping to the next challenge, Ellie saw this fastball be called a strike on a 1-0, successfully getting it overturned. That pitch missed by nearly 2.5 inches. This was when the real circus started, as with 2 outs and the bases loaded, Eugenio Suarez would get down 1-2 before taking a sinker for strike 3. That was at least until he ABS'd his way into a 2-2 count. At least that one only missed by 0.3 inches. Then he would do the same thing on the very next offering, getting this fastball overturned on his way to a 3-2. I get missing pitches occasionally, as umpires are people too, but on back-to-back offerings, in a spot that big? Crazy. He would ground out shortly after, so it didn't end up meaning much, but still. Things were so bad at this point that Caleb Durbin, at the plate with the tying run in scoring position in the top of the 7th after Willie Abreu had already knocked an RBI double, took this fastball that missed up high for a strike, and then nearly instinctually tried to challenge the pitch before remembering that his team was completely out of them. Our final moment of real embarrassment, at least in relation to the ABS system, came in the bottom of the 7th, when, once again, a Reds batter had 2 pitches that would have been called strikes overturned into balls, en route to a 4-pitch walk, with Will Benson being the beneficiary. It's worth pointing out as well that throughout the course of all of these challenges, Buckner's body language was getting worse and worse, almost like he was getting irritated, and he would finally take it out on Boston in the top of the 8th, when, with 2 runners on and 2 out, Trevor Story checked his swing on a splitter in the dirt, with CB not asking for help from the relevant field umpire en route to just calling him out. In action, that's a bit out of the ordinary considering both the gravity of the situation and normal operating procedure. This was the final straw for Alex Cora, who, in the process of letting Buckner know how bad he'd been, got booted from the ballgame. From here, there'd be a couple more bad calls, but nothing significant enough to get challenged on Cincinnati's end. As for the game itself, Abreu would come up in the 9th with 2 outs and absolutely destroy a hanging splitter from Emilio Pagan, tying the game in the process, setting us up for extras after Aroldis Chapman retired the side in the 9th. The next inning and a half would be scoreless, with the most notable play being when Trevor Story lined into an unassisted double play, fielded by Matt McLain. giving Cincinnati another chance at their first win of the year, and they would indeed secure this when Dane Meyer came up and flipped a line drive to left field off of Justin Slayton, with Roman Anthony registering one of the worst throws I've seen in a minute in a big spot, a 10-hopper that had no chance to beat runner TJ Friedl, allowing the Reds to walk off in exciting fashion. Now, let's get back to the focus of the video, CB and his horrible performance, one that was verified post-game when Umpire Scorecard published their analysis, one that declared that he had a relative accuracy 5.5% worse than your typical umpire, missing 26 calls in this one. That's just hard to believe, but I guess a little less so when you realize he only called 72% of all possible strikes correctly. The only real consolation here is that he did indeed get embarrassed on a national level with all of those overturns, though I'm sure if you ask both teams, they would have just preferred a better umpiring performance. Before we get into the video, let me make something clear. I myself am a Detroit Tigers fan, and as such, probably a bigger Kevin McGonigle proponent than most. The professor has a chance to be one of those players that comes along for a team every couple decades and completely takes the reins of a franchise. Someone like Julio Rodriguez or Vladimir Guerrero Jr. But even I, in my most optimistic view, couldn't have anticipated that he would do something so completely unprecedented in his first big league game. But that's exactly what he did, and it was something to behold. His first opportunity for impact would come in the top of the first inning, when with the bases loaded and 1 out and his squad already out to a 1-0 lead, he attacked a cutter up and in, lining it down the right field line for his first hit on his first pitch scene, leading to his first extra base knock when he made his way into second, and his first couple RBIs, extending the Motor City Kitties' lead up to 3-0. Dylan Dingler would then follow with a single of his own to make it a 4-run initial frame. Tarik Skubal would then do Tarik Skubal things, working his way out of a jam in the first before retiring San Diego easily in the second. This brings us to McGonigle's second plate appearance with Spencer Torkelson on first base. This is where he flexed his power swing, crushing a 2-2 fastball down the line and right, missing a home run by mere feet while managing to hustle his way into second base just ahead of a Tatis Jr. missile. That ball was launched out there at 106 miles an hour and came in an at-bat where he'd gotten down 0-2. Parker Meadows would later score both him and Tork on a flare to left center field, pushing Detroit's lead up to 6-0. All of this to this point was of course incredibly impressive, but actually I think his single most surprising hit would come next, when after again getting down 0-2, this time to former Yankee Ron Marinaccio, he dribbled the ball towards shortstop, with Xander Bogaerts not being able to quite get him at first base on a barehanded attempt. Now, that might look like your run-of-the-mill infield single, but it actually was much more than that, because on this knock, he reached a top sprint speed of 30.2 feet per second, which is considered a bolt per StatCast, designating it as a downright ridiculous feat of speed, something that really has never been considered to be part of his game. He was always seen as more so having solidly above average wheels, not outlier ones. Shout out to Tom Nestico for pointing this out on Twitter, by the way. Dylan Dingler would drive him in 5 pitches later on the Tigers' first home run of the year, elongating their lead to 8-0. Tarik Skubal would end up completing 6 innings, having only given up 1 earned run after Javier Baez made an error, with the big lefty departing, only having thrown 74 pitches, but being as how it was opening day and a bit of a blowout, it made sense to save some bullets there. San Diego would end up getting a 423-foot shot off the bat of Ramon Laureano, but overall, it just didn't feel all that competitive at this point. This meant that the last real moment of note would be in the 9th, when, with 2 outs and facing a lefty for the first time, KC lined a 1-1 sinker into the gap in right center field, with it getting down for his 4th hit of the ballgame. This made him, per Peyton of Big League Analysis on Twitter, the first player to have at least 4 hits and 2 extra base hits in an MLB debut on opening day. Pretty crazy considering all the excellent debuts we've seen over the years. But Kevin is indeed an outlier talent, and so it's not really all that surprising he's already setting records. Will Vest would put the finishing touches on this one with a 1-2-3 ninth, simultaneously securing Detroit's first win of the year and putting a bow on the incredibly impressive and outright historic debut of Kevin McGonigle. For all the issues Oneil Cruz had last year when it came to his production, particularly in the effort and hitting departments, one thing no one could say is that he wasn't good with the glove, as he posted a fielding run value of 4 as a center fielder, a total largely aided by his exceptional arm, but still, he was good out there. With that being said, he still makes the occasional brutal mistake, and he just so happened to make 2 of them in the first inning of the first game of the year, on back-to-back pitches, basically dooming Paul Skeens to the worst start of his career. His night certainly began well, with him knocking a single to center field to open his season, before getting driven in on a Brandon Lowe 2-run homer immediately after. Last year, this basically would have meant that it was going to be a win for starter Skeens barring some kind of bullpen blowup, but 2026 is a new season, and he certainly didn't help himself in the bottom of the first, walking Francisco Lindor on a 3-2 before giving up a single to Juan Soto. Bo Bichette would then do what he does best and get down 0-2 before driving in a runner from third base with less than 2 outs on a sacrifice fly. The bases would become loaded 2 batters later after a seeing-eye single and tenacious walk drawn by Luis Robert, which featured 10 pitches being seen. This brought Brett Beatty to the box, lining a ball to straightaway center field. Unfortunately for Paul, though, Cruz got a horrible jump on what probably should have been a routine play, breaking in and then back before seeing it go over his head, scoring all 3 runners. The effect of that mistake already was huge, as if he makes that play, the game is tied and there are 2 outs. Instead, Brett was on third with a triple. But the inning wasn't over yet, as on the very next offering, Marcus Semien would fly a ball to shallow center, with O'Neill coming in, tracking it, and then losing it in the last minute in the sun. This not only scored another run, the 5th of the frame, but also forced Skeens to have to keep throwing pitches, as he would have been out of the inning entirely had his center fielder made both of those plays. Instead, after a strikeout and hit by pitch, he was pulled, with his final line on the day coming in at 2/3 of an inning, with 5 earned runs because, crucially, neither one of those were considered errors, on 4 hits and 2 walks, easily the shortest and worst outing of his entire career. And the embarrassment for Cruz wasn't over yet, as he would go on to both be the victim of the first ABS overturn in MLB history while in the process of still walking to first base, and then a voracious bat throw on a strikeout. When it was all said and done, he had gone 1 for 5 with 3 strikeouts and those 2 misplays. Certainly a game to forget. The rest of the contest would be an offensive barrage from both squads, with the Pirates getting another home run from Lau as well as one from Ryan O'Hearn, with that new-look offense firing on all cylinders. Unfortunately for them, the Mets proved relentless, with rookie Carson Bench getting his first career hit on a home run, and then Francisco Alvarez blasting one nearly 430 feet immediately after. Pittsburgh would add a couple more on in the 9th, but eventually fall after Cruz himself struck out swinging on a splitter, giving both clubs both a lot to criticize and like about the game overall, though I will acknowledge that there was very little good with O'Neill's involvement outside of that first at-bat. Mike Trout had easily his worst season ever last year, in which he managed to play any meaningful amount of games, with a .232, .359, .439 slash line, 41 total extra base hits, and just 1.5 WAR in 129 contests. For a little reference, he had 2.9 and 82 in 2023. It's for this reason a lot of people in the baseball space found themselves questioning whether or not we had seen the last of an elite Trout. And, well, perhaps this in some way inspired him to accomplish what he has through his first 2 games in 2026, which is to say, something we hadn't seen since 1977, fully turning back the clock in the process. Let me take you through each of his at-bats so far this season before getting into his actual feat towards the end. His campaign kicked off with a classic MVP level at-bat, with him working Hunter Brown for 7 pitches before drawing a hard-fought walk. Now, in 2025, this would have been it for him on the bases, unless he got scored on a hit or something. But 2026 Mike is different, as he would nearly immediately turn around and swipe second base, equaling 1/2 of his total steals from last season. His next at-bat would come in the 3rd, and would again feature him walking, this time on 5 pitches and without an ensuing stolen base. The same was true in the 5th. 5 pitches, another walk. Keep in mind, at this time, neither team had scored even a single run. This ratcheted up the tension when he came up to the box in the top of the 7th. It just felt at this point like something special was coming. And indeed it was, as he would receive a fastball center cut, and get every single stitch of it, crushing it at 108.5 miles per hour, 403 feet to left field, delivering the lead to his squad with a go-ahead tank. And to Anaheim's credit, they would indeed make it stand up, stranding a leadoff double in the 7th to keep the Astros scoreless. Mike's final at-bat of the night would come in the top of the 9th, when he struck out on a slider, being sandwiched in between 2 runs by his team on an Oswald Peraza RBI single and Nolan Schanuel home run. Jordan Romano would then close things out in the 9th, cementing the Angels' first win of the year, and a 1-for-2 performance for Trout, with 3 walks, a home run, and a stolen base. The first inning of Game 2 would feature his first single of the season, a fly ball in the right spot with Zach Neto on second, helping his team to score a run when Schanuel grounded into a double play. By the time he got back up there in the 3rd, the score was 4-1, courtesy of the first home run in an Angels uniform for Josh Lowe, and Trout stayed red hot, grounding a ball into left field off of shortstop Jeremy Pena's glove. But the real highlight of this one would come in the 5th, when he torched the sinker on the inner half to left field, reaching 109.7 miles per hour on its exit velocity while watching it travel 403 feet yet again. A vintage swing from the 3-time MVP. His final 2 at-bats would be much less descript, with him flying out to right field in the 7th and then drawing yet another walk in the 9th. Jordan Romano would then pitch his second scoreless inning in 2 days. That meant through 2 games, he had gone 4 for 6 with 2 homers, 4 walks, and a stolen base. This allowed him, per Sarah Langs on Twitter, to become the first player since Amos Otis in 1977 to homer and reach base 4 times in his team's first 2 games of the season. A downright ridiculous feat fit for a player of ridiculous talent. Now I'm just hoping that he can keep up something close to this quality of play, as well as staying healthy for the remainder of 2026. Shohei Ohtani is doing Shohei Ohtani things in the early days of 2026, beginning his year by registering a near 900 OPS in his first 12 games, along with not giving up an earned run in his first 2 starts. But while his production is, of course, incredible, that's not what I wanted to talk about today. Instead being 2 little mini controversies he found himself in at the outset of his start yesterday versus the Blue Jays, including the first accidental ABS challenge we may have ever seen on an MLB field. Let's go in chronological order though, which means we need to first discuss the Blue Jays getting frustrated at him for the amount of time he was taking to warm up, with George Springer literally going up to home plate umpire Dan Bellino and asking if he was even allowed to take that much time to warm up. This pissed off Dave Roberts about as much as I've ever seen, apart from ejections or something. Just look at that. He was incensed. For a little bit of background, they actually were doing this during the World Series last year as well, and while I do understand that it's frustrating to potentially have a little bit of a delay, as Dave said at the time, this is a special circumstance, not one you're going to encounter at all besides with Ohtani, so I personally see it as a little bit petty, but it is what it is, and I do get that they're probably a little bit grumpy coming off of losing the first 2 games of the series. It was then on the first official pitch that we would see our second moment that I outlined, when Shohei fired a 95-mile-per-hour sinker low, before, incidentally, going to adjust the back of his cap, which catcher Will Smith perceived as his wont to challenge, which he obliged, making it clear to Bellino that they were doing so. The call was shortly after upheld, with it having missed the strike zone by a relatively significant amount. Let's take a look at that one more time in slow motion. Do you see how Smith does not go for the immediate challenge after he receives the pitch, waiting to do so until he sees Ohtani's hand go behind his head? I just think Shohei was adjusting his cap here. It doesn't look like it was anything more than that if you zoom in. And then Smith, operating 60 feet away, seemed to misperceive it as a wanted challenge, which he of course was going to make sure was provided to his MVP superstar hurler. In the process, they just seemed to get their wires crossed a little bit. The Blue Jays would go on to win this ball game when it was all said and done, scoring just 1 run off of Ohtani, but then 3 off the Dodger bullpen in the 7th and 8th, with the go-ahead tally eventually coming in when Miguel Rojas couldn't corral this throw to second base on a steal, with Jeff Hoffman getting some much-needed redemption by closing things out in the 9th, salvaging 1 game out of the 3-game series. Max Clark is a consensus top 10 prospect in minor league baseball, being projected as having a plus eye, great speed, decent raw pop, and an excellent glove in center field. On top of all of these tools, he's also got 80 grade confidence, coming out in today's game with no less than 4 diamond chains on, despite being a rookie not at this point projected to make the team on opening day. And that certainly is fine by me. I don't care about a player's stylings. But I do think it ended up looking a bit funny today after he proceeded to make nearly the same amount of mistakes in his very first inning out there as the number of chains he had on. Facing the Braves in the bottom of the first inning, Clark first garnered a little spotlight when Atlanta's broadcast crew pointed out all of his drip, with them even saying that he must be, quote, built different to sport that in a spring contest. In a manner of pretty hilarious timing, it would be just 1 batter later where Matt Olson would flip this ball to shallow left field, sending Max after it, where after battling the sun, he still got underneath it, called it, and then outright dropped it. Just a little sidebar, but look at the broadcast cutout here. You can really tell it's still spring. The replay certainly doesn't do him any favors either. But the sun is brutal, right? And stuff like this happens in spring all the time. It's not all that notable. But it became a little bit more so when the very next batter, Austin Riley, launched a ball to left field, sending the lefty back this time onto the track, where he camped under it and at the last second pulled off it. With it, mercifully for the time being, not scoring any runs because it bounced over the fence. That made it 2 embarrassing misses for the young player in just the first inning, and it set up Ozzie Albies with 2 guys on in scoring position, something that would indeed be consequential when the switch hitter lined a ball down the left field line to drive in both. This is where we would see our last misstep of the frame, when, with Albies attempting to get in a second, Clark trickled in a 3-hopper because his foot slipped on the lip of the dirt and the grass. This meant in the span of just 4 batters, we had seen the rookie, decked out about as extravagantly as any player in the big leagues currently, have the ultimate nightmare sequence, especially for somebody trying to make an impression in big league camp. I will reiterate once again, his style choices don't bother me personally, but you have to admit that the timing of the broadcast pointing it out with the subsequent missteps was comedy gold, and certainly worth detailing. Just an FYI as well to any angry Detroit fans out there who are going to watch this video and think I hate your team. I'm actually a fan myself, so it really is nothing personal. The first season of Munetaka Murakami's career has pretty much gone exactly as expected so far, with him blasting 6 homers in his first 20 games, with 28 strikeouts, 17 walks, a 200 average, and an 838 OPS. But among the various highlights he's registered so far, the most impressive arguably came yesterday, when he managed to not only crush his first career grand slam, but to do so with a swing so powerful that it may have outright broke StatCast momentarily. The Japanese lefty was at the plate in a then 5-1 game in the 7th inning, with the bases juiced, working the count full versus Elvis Alvarado, who was chucking near 100 miles per hour on average, a velo range that many scouts were concerned that Murakami would have little chance of touching. It was then, on the 3-2, he got a 98 mile per hour fastball right down the middle, and he absolutely did not miss it, crushing it at 114.1 miles per hour to center field, at a launch angle of 33 degrees, allowing it to fully clear the batter's eye out there. Now, just from the eye test, I'm sure many would assume that this was a 460-foot plus shot, right? To clear the batter's eye when the distance to even get beyond the fence is 404? It had to be. But that's not what StatCast said, with its estimated distance coming out to 431. Shout out, by the way, to Baseball World on Twitter, who was the first one I saw that pointed out the peculiarity of this. So I did some digging to see if this may have been a misread, and I found some interesting stuff. First off, the average distance of a home run hit between 32 and 33 degrees, with an exit velocity of between 113 and 115 miles an hour. Since StatCast began tracking batted balls back in 2015, is 444 feet. This means that, somehow, Mooney's was 13 feet shorter than this, despite the fact that his exit velo was half a mile an hour harder. But that could be circumstantial based on a variety of things. No, the real piece of evidence I think that's a bit more damning that this may have been a misread is how similar balls have flown so far at Sutter Health Park. Since the A's began playing there last season, there have been 5 balls hit out between 30 and 33 degrees, and at an exit velocity of between 110 and 115 miles an hour. Of those, the only one that traveled less than 447 feet was Munetaka's, with most of them being in excess of 450. Take a look at this shot from Nick Kurtz last year that left his bat at 114.6 miles per hour at a launch angle of 30 degrees. That also cleared the batter's eye. This one did look a bit further to me, but its estimated distance was 493 feet, the longest of 2025, despite peripherals that really weren't all that much different than Munetaka's, or at least not substantially so. How about this Riley Green shot that apparently went 471 feet despite leaving his bat at over 3 miles an hour softer and at a similar launch angle of 30 degrees? Do I think there's any kind of malice in this potential misread? No, not in the slightest. It's a known factor that StatCast struggles with tracking balls that travel beyond objects on the field, but I did think it was worth pointing out that this blast from Murakami may have indeed traveled quite a bit further than what was estimated. And hey, it also gave me a chance to talk about the emerging White Sox star, who I think could end up having a truly fascinating stat line by the time the season concludes, one that rivals prime Joey Gallo in its extremity. I had the idea for this video on my list for a couple days now, but I preferred to avoid making it because I've already made a couple videos about backup catcher Dalton Rushing, and frankly, I don't want to beat a dead horse. But something came out a couple days ago that was recently confirmed by the player who saw it themselves, that just put the nail in the coffin for me. So, today, I'm going to go over each of the 4 incidents in which Dalton Rushing has disrespected a fellow player in the past 2 weeks or so. We'll start with the most obvious, when he directly said to the media that there was something fishy about the Rockies beating the Dodgers because of how they were teeing off on first pitches supposedly. The only issue is that just 2 hits in that entire ballgame came on first pitches, with his own manager basically denouncing this later by saying that the staff just needed to execute better. Losing to a team that most people think you should probably beat is one thing, but then implying that they were cheating afterwards is even more embarrassing in my opinion. But, oh, were we just getting started? A couple days later, versus the Giants this time, Jung-Hoo Lee was attempting to score from first base on a single to center field, racing around the bags before getting thrown out on a well-executed relay. It was then, as he sat on the ground, obviously in some pain, Rushing looked back before muttering, "F him," very obviously in plain sight. Everybody at some point is going to get injured on the field more than likely, and it's kind of an unwritten rule that any player, whether they're on that person's team or not, at least shows the courtesy to feign concern. Even indifference would be tolerable, frankly. But this was just classless. Literally, the next day, he was right back at it, putting up one of the dirtier slides you'll see in the modern era, directly into the legs of shortstop Willy Adames. He wasn't even close to the bag. This was so overt, in fact, that Luis Arias directly called it out post-game, saying that it was, quote, not good baseball because of how dirty it was. I will acknowledge that Rushing had been hit by a pitch shortly before this, but if he was really that pressed about it, he could have chosen to charge the mound and take on the guy who actually hit him with the pitch, instead of trying to sever the ligaments of someone who had nothing to do with it. And finally, the cherry on top of this crap Sunday came when Miguel Amaya, the catcher for the Cubs, made a heads-up play by advancing to second on a ball that Dalton wasn't really rushing to pick up. Even though that was 100% his fault for not taking the play seriously, he decided to instead call his fellow backstop a fat expletive, drawing a pretty intense glare from batter Nico Horner, who would end up saying a couple days after that he had indeed used those exact words to describe his teammate, something that he regretted not responding to more in the moment. You could justify any one of these situations all day if you want to try, but when you put it all together, there's just no doubt in my mind this dude has an attitude problem, which, frankly, is a bit hard to believe. He's just in his second year of big league baseball, and has so far been more good than great, even if his 2026 has gotten off to an impressive start. Ego issues look bad on anybody, and that includes the 25-year-old. About a week ago, I published a video on Jo Adell's single-game performance versus the Mariners, in which he robbed 3 separate home runs, a feat that I believe yielded the greatest defensive showing in the history of the sport for one contest. And like most of the greatest performances ever, you had to see it to believe it, and I think you could say the same about a stat I learned today in regards to Padres pitcher Mason Miller, who, so far in 2026, is not only off to the best start in the history of baseball in terms of pure dominance, but also has done something that was so ridiculous I had to double and then triple check before I believed it. I'll get more into that in a moment, but first I wanted to detail what every one of his appearances has looked like so far, so you can bear witness alongside me to the ridiculousness. Let's begin with what was an exceptionally slow start, when in his first 2 games against the Tigers and Giants, he pitched a combined total of 2 1/3 innings, while giving up 2 base runners courtesy of a walk and hit, while only striking out 5. I am of course being hyperbolic here with my choice of words, but believe me, in comparison to what he would do next, this was basically the equivalent of giving up 5 homers. Because in his next game versus the Red Sox, he would face 3 batters, and strike them all out, while throwing only 11 pitches. Nobody was even able to sniff fair contact, and it would be the same story the next night. 3 batters faced, 3 punch-outs, with only 12 pitches being thrown. We now come to arguably his 3rd worst performance of the year, when he only managed to strike out 2 batters in his perfect inning, while throwing 10 pitches in the process. The Pirates really did manage to touch him up for a single ball hit fair, with this notable accomplishment coming off the bat of Jake Mangum with 2 outs. And then, despite appearing both nights after this versus the Rockies, he would cap off his first 7 appearances of the season by striking out all 6 of the batters he faced, while throwing a combined 23 pitches in the process. Even on night 3, with so much high-octane gas already having been doled out, and in his second straight tied game, he was still routinely pumping over 100 miles an hour, with that slider looking as sharp as ever. Now that we've gone through his game logs, let me give you 2 stats that I think best encapsulate his domination, starting with the one that's actually somehow much less impressive in my opinion, which was posted by Codify, pointing out that the fewest batters that's ever taken to reach 19 strikeouts was Miller, of course, being the obvious outlier with only 24 being faced in comparison to the next closest, at 37. That in and of itself would have been worthy of a video, but this is not the single greatest pitching accomplishment in MLB history in my opinion. No, instead, I would point this out as deserving of that title, because, you see, in those 7 appearances that he's made this season, in which he's registered 19 strikeouts, he has only thrown 20 balls in the process, as pointed out by Danny on Twitter. If that doesn't seem possible to you, I get it. I had to go check the game log, and then recheck it again, just to verify its legitimacy, but it's indeed true, per Baseball Reference. Let me recap exactly what this means. In facing his first 24 batters of the season, he not only has punched out 19 of them, but been about as likely to strike them out as to deliver a single ball to them. Obviously, no one else has ever done that over a stretch this large, nor gotten anywhere close, which is why I wanted to point this out, as arguably the most impressive baseball stat I've ever witnessed, let alone those specifically related to pitching. We could be witnessing an all-time great season right now from a reliever, one that completely resets the standards of what is possible out of the bullpen. The New York Mets remain one of the most talented teams in Major League Baseball in the early days of this season, with a roster full of All-Stars and future Hall of Famers. But something that followed them throughout the back half of 2025 that really impeded their ability to be good was profound bouts of mental laziness, and we just got to see this phenomena raise its ugly head for the first time in 2026. When Francisco Lindor had not one, but 2 inexcusable mental lapses en route to his team losing by just a single run. The shenanigans began in the bottom of the first, when, with 1 on and 1 out, Alec Burleson grounded a routine double play ball up the middle, where Lindor fielded it, stepped on second, and then just went to run off the field, because he had forgotten how many outs there were. I get after a chaotic inning, where perhaps 2 or 3 runs have scored, spacing on something like that. But to do it in the bottom of the first, when your starter's only thrown 14 pitches, is just nearly incomprehensible to me, and this would cost Freddie Peralta an additional 5 pitches before he struck out Mason Wynn. This will be important later on. From here, both Peralta and St. Louis starter Matthew Liberatore would proceed to absolutely dominate over the next 4 innings, with neither squad managing to push across a single run entering the 6th. It was at this point Lindor would reach on a fielding error by Nolan Gorman, putting a rare base runner on, of which the team had only registered 4 to that point, for Juan Soto. Or, at least that would have been the case had Lindor not spaced out while Matthew was making a snap throw, nabbing the veteran in one of the easier pickoffs you'll ever see on an MLB field. In that spot, being the 6th inning of a scoreless ballgame, to not be locked in is, again, inexcusable. Games in April count every bit as much as games in September, even if the pressure isn't quite as high. So to dampen opportunities like that is just mentally lazy. And it would immediately come back to bite his squad, who watched Soto crush a home run down the right field line. His first of the season, a solo shot that would have been of the 2-run variety had Francisco locked in for just a second. And remember how I said before that those 5 pitches in the first would come back to haunt Peralta? Let's discuss that. In the bottom of the 6th, after 2 guys got on with nobody out, he struck out Alec Burleson on a fastball. Now, if he was at 87 pitches, he probably would have been allowed to stay in the ballgame and attack Mason Wynn at least, if not Nolan Gorman right after, setting up a subsequent lefty-lefty matchup if somebody was going to come out of the bullpen. But we'll never know, because instead, he was at 92 pitches, courtesy of that brain fart earlier, prompting Carlos Mendoza to go to righty Huescar Brazoban, who retired Wynn but gave up the game-tying RBI single to Gorman. After a number of wasted opportunities by the Mets at the plate, including from Lindor himself, who would finish this one 0 for 4, we would reach the bottom of the 11th, where Mason Wynn would flare a 2-out single just out of the reach of a diving Carson Benj in right, walking off New York entirely. This is a game where those little mistakes hurt. If Peralta is allowed to stay in the 6th, maybe the Cardinals don't tie the game. If Soto hits a 2-run shot instead of a solo, maybe they finish off the Redbirds in 9. That's why you can't take anything for granted on an MLB field. A lesson, I would argue, Lindor should probably already know by now. Through 2 games, the San Francisco Giants are off to the worst start we've possibly ever seen offensively for a major league team. And not because they got shut out in back-to-back games. That would be depressing enough, but not exactly historic. No, it's because they've also combined for just 4 hits in that time as well, and 10 total base runners. But perhaps even more concerning than this immediate mega-funk was the reaction of their rookie manager when asked about it following their second loss. I'll get more into that in a minute, but first I want to take you through an exercise to better understand how inept this offense has been. I'm going to detail every single time a Giants batter got on base in their first 2 games. Trust me, we won't be here all that long. Things started well, with Luis Arias and Rafael Devers reaching in the first inning of the first game, on a walk and flare single respectively. Unfortunately for San Francisco, Willy Adames would then strike out and Jung-Hoo Lee would ground out, squandering a golden opportunity. Casey Schmidt would get hit by a pitch in the second inning, then Elliot Ramos would single on a weak line drive to Aaron Judge in right field in the 4th. In this time, as well, keep in mind that starter Logan Webb had given up 5 runs in the second, so they needed traffic. But that certainly is not what they got. Their next base runner wouldn't come until the bottom of the 8th, when, with 2 outs, Arias would ground a single into right field. Matt Chapman followed with a walk. Would this finally be the moment they could score for the first time on the season, even in a game that had pretty much gotten out of hand at this point, with a score of 7-0? Nope. Rafael Devers would fly out routinely to center to end it. Their 6th base runner of the night came in the 9th, and it wasn't even a product of anything they themselves did, with Jose Caballero making an error on an Adames ground ball. But that wouldn't end up meaning anything, as Casey Schmidt would fly out to right field to seal their first shutout loss of the year. In their defense, though, it was versus one of the best pitchers in the sport, Max Fried, and a Yankee bullpen that has some arms in there, and they'd get an off day to recharge before Friday's game. It couldn't get any worse, right? Unfortunately for them, the answer to that is 100% yes it could. Sophomore standout Cam Schlittler was on the hill in Game 2, and he looked every bit as dominant as we remember from the 2025 playoffs, striking out 2 in the first inning and looking untouchable in the process. Ramos would come through in the second on a line drive double down the right field line, again giving San Francisco another prime opportunity for a 2-out hit with runners in scoring position, but they again couldn't do anything with it. Schmidt popped up to second base to strand him there. Little did they know, this would be their last runner in scoring position until the 9th. They were retired in order in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th innings, striking out 5 times in the process, and not really managing to hit much of anything on a line. And again, similar to their first game, there would be one real implosion inning on the hill. As with 1 out in the 6th, Robbie Ray gave up a 2-run long ball to Aaron Judge. Then, after Jose Butto came in to stop the bleeding, Giancarlo Stanton crushed his own Titanic blast with 2 outs, giving New York a 3-run lead. The 7th would see Matt Chapman draw a leadoff walk, but not get anything else, with 2 more punch-outs being recorded by the middle of their lineup. This was followed by Camilo Duvall, the former Giant, striking out the side in the 8th, all swinging. Would the 9th manage to bring even a single blip in the radar? Not really. Matt Chapman would draw a 2-out walk and then advance to third on 2 straight defensive indifferences, but he would again be stranded there when Rafael Devers grounded out weakly to second base, sealing their 2nd straight shutout loss, this one of the one-hit variety. This made them the first team in MLB history to open a season without scoring a single run in their first 2 games and register less than 5 total hits, quite possibly the worst offensive start in the history of the major leagues. But again, we're 2 games in, and they were indeed facing 2 pretty tough arms. So panicking at this stage probably isn't smart, right? Well, I'm not sure their rookie manager Tony Vitello got that memo, as a guy who just jumped straight from the college ranks had this to say when asked about the reasoning for their offense's cold start.
I'd kind of put it on me a little bit, get all fire and brimstone a few days ago, and I think some good words were shared, but I also think as of right now, it's a little emotional in there, and there's definitely a lot of try hard, so there's probably too much. And again, maybe that stems from that conversation prior to the season, or maybe it just stems from all the opening day fanfare being the home team. But regardless, everybody wants it to change.
I don't know what he said in that clubhouse specifically, so I'm not in a place to speculate on its intensity. But I can say that after the 2nd game of the year, getting this serious and floating to the media ideas as to why your guys are struggling, with your reasoning being that you may have made the clubhouse too uptight, is a bad look. This is where most MLB managers would give a boring response. We trust the process, the hits just have to start falling now, we're in a bit of a funk but we'll get out of it, etc. There's a reason they do this. You don't want to destabilize the clubhouse by constantly airing out your dirty laundry. Those are adults with jobs, not kids in college trying to develop. Obviously, it's his rookie year at the helm, so we'll see if this vibe that currently exists lasts the entire season. For the sake of Giants fans everywhere, who I do have some compassion for considering how mediocre they've been for the last half-decade, I certainly hope not. Yordon Alvarez had an extremely tough 2025, playing in by far the fewest total of games of his entire career outside of the COVID-shortened 2020 season, at just 48, and in that time he wasn't nearly as productive as he usually is as well, with just 6 homers, a 273, 367, 430 slash line, and a 121 OPS+. Again, though, he was dealing with injuries, and the underlying numbers looked every bit as good as they ever had, so it's not like there's a ton of concern outside of his health coming into 2026. With that being said, I'm sure he wants to get off to a good start to get that bad taste out of his mouth, which makes what happened today in the first inning of his contest versus the Angels all the more unfortunate, when he lost what would have been a home run because of an odd quirk of his own ballpark. Facing Jose Soriano with 1 out, he got a breaking ball in the inner half of the plate and absolutely demolished it to right field, with, at the time, the only real question seeming to be whether or not it would be fair or foul. But then, as you can see in the broadcast, it fell into the seats well off of where it seemed to be headed for, with it subsequently being called a foul ball. So, what happened? Well, as you can see in the replay, it banged off the roof and then ricocheted out of play. After a short review, it was determined that the flight path of the ball was inconclusive, and so the initial call of foul ball was upheld. The big lefty would eventually end up striking out on a sinker later on, forcing him to go from the best outcome possible on the baseball field to the absolute worst. Man, baseball sure can be brutal. Now, before we go as well, I wanted to give a mini shout out to ABS for saving us from a bad Laz Diaz call for the first time ever, with this pitch 2 inches out of the strike zone being called a strike to Matt Wallner being reversed after a short review. Obvious missed calls are mostly a thing of the past now, and I couldn't be happier about it. Listen, I'll fully acknowledge, I've been making a lot of umpire videos here recently, and I don't want to keep doing that all season. It's not fun to consistently dunk on guys who are just doing their jobs, albeit very poorly. Unless it's somebody like CB Buckner, who also has what seems to be a negative attitude to go along with it. And that's why I feel perfectly fine with capturing yet another one of his ridiculous mistakes yesterday, when he made a downright inconceivable call on a play that, get ready for it, he wasn't even looking at. Milwaukee was facing the Rays in the 6th inning of a then 4-2 ball game, with Gary Sanchez having just gone deep. This brought lefty Jake Bauers to the plate, with him lining a 2-0 fastball off the glove of a diving Ben Williamson, who then spun and fired a throw nowhere close. It was then, as Bauers was making his way back to the bag, that he was inexplicably called out by Buckner, in the process gesturing towards first base as if he'd missed it entirely on his way down the line. This, of course, triggered a replay review, because pretty much everybody was confused by the call, and you can see in this replay that Bauers not only made contact with first base, essentially, his entire foot was on it, and CB wasn't even looking at that aspect of the play. What was the point of that? How did he feel comfortable to make such a declarative call, as you can see from his gesture here yet again, when his eyes weren't even on it? Sure, you could claim that maybe he didn't hear the base get impacted, but if you're not 100% on that, why not leave it up to replay review? I'm sure they would have caught it in the Tampa dugout if that had been the case. To top it all off, he just looked super smug during the entire replay process, as if he was going to get vindicated. Thankfully, he wasn't. It was indeed overturned. And just in case you needed any more ammunition for how stupid this was, look at the reactions of both managers to the play. Those are two hardened big league skippers, not being able to hold back chuckles at the absurdity of the waste of time that was this review. But you know what made it even better after that? The Brewers would go on to score another run in this inning, on a Brandon Lockridge double, meaning that if this would have stood, it would have not only robbed the Brewers of a runner, but of a run itself. It's starting to feel more and more like Buckner might take the Angel Hernandez route if this kind of public humiliation keeps coming his way, and I can't say I necessarily would blame him, even if he is the one catalyzing it in the first place. The Brewers would go on to win by a final score of 6-2, helping them to get out to one of the hottest starts in the entire major leagues, as they currently are tied for the best record in the sport at 4-1, for whatever that's worth 5 games into the season. Before we go, I also wanted to give a mini shout out to rookie Jose Fernandez, who, in his first career game, absolutely skewered my Tigers, getting 3 hits, 2 homers, and the game-deciding long ball in the 8th inning. Even if I was punching the air last night as I observed it, I have to acknowledge how impressive it is to begin your big league career with a performance like that. I made a video a little while back talking about a couple inexcusable plays mentally from Francisco Lindor, in a game against the Cardinals that the Mets would end up losing by a single run. These did seem to be completely out of character, so I didn't expect this lazy narrative to get much of any run as the season progressed. But since then, not only has he not managed to get much of anything going at the plate or on the bases, with just a .546 OPS, 0 homers, and 1 swipe, but he's also registered a couple other notable blunders, like this one in a game versus the A's, where, with runners in the corners, he got trapped off of third, getting thrown out trying to go back, even if it may have indirectly saved his team a double play, and then one yesterday that didn't have anything positive in regards to it. That was perhaps the most incomprehensible of any so far this season, where he just completely abandoned his positional role with the bases loaded, outright allowing the opposing team to score a run in the process. It was the second inning of a tie ball game with Lawrence Butler at the plate. The lefty grounded a forkball up the middle, where Marcus Semien fielded it and then looked up to throw to Lindor, who I'm sure he expected to be cutting across the bag. But the veteran was nowhere to be found, instead being behind Marcus in the outfield grass, forcing Semien to make a desperation run towards second to just record a single out, one that he barely managed to get ahead of speedy base runner Denzel Clark. I want you to look at this play from a couple angles, and tell me what you possibly think he could have saw that justified going after this ball. It was well to the right of the bag up the middle, and Semien was tracking it the entire time. And hell, even if Lindor fielded that ball in shallow right center field, there was pretty much zero chance he was going to get Butler, who has decent speed at first base. Literally the only play that they had was, at a minimum, a force out at second. And if it wasn't for the quick thinking of his Gold Glove double play partner, they wouldn't have even gotten a single out. If you see one of these plays over the course of the early part of a season, you can just chalk it up to coincidence, as every player has them. 2, maybe some April laziness. But 4, in the season's first 15 or so games, when your club is struggling no less? It's just hard to understand, especially as someone who's supposed to be one of the leaders of the team. New York would go on to lose this contest by a final score of 11-6, pulling back within a run in the bottom of the 7th before seeing Luke Weaver give up 4 in the 8th. Francisco continued to be absent at the plate, going just 1 for 5 with 2 Ks, which still somehow raised his batting average to 167. And it would be the same story the following day, though with far less explosions, as the Mets fell by a final score of 1-0, sealing a sweep at the hands of the Sacramento Oakland A's of Las Vegas, and a 5-game losing streak for a team that desperately could have used a hot start after their disastrous end to 2025. I haven't been making a ton of videos about Shohei Ohtani in the early days of 2026 because, while his start to the season has been excellent, especially on the mound where he hasn't allowed an earned run yet, it hasn't been particularly record-setting. Yet, or notable narrative-wise. But we just got a chance to see here yesterday, something that fits a little more of that description, as he experienced what was one of the more traumatizing games you'll see on an MLB field, without a player actually getting injured, and his response was absolutely golden afterwards. Things got started quick in this one. In the bottom of the first inning, he was hit on a 94-mile-per-hour sinker on an 0-2 pitch. Now, while this did extend his on-base streak to 47 games, it was also highly concerning based on its location. He's lucky he ended up taking it off his shoulder blade and not something more impactful, especially at that velocity. Unfortunately, this also broke his streak of leadoff home runs at 2 games, through literally no fault of his own. He would eventually come around to score on a Will Smith RBI single later in that frame. To the credit of Mets starting pitcher David Peterson, he would work out of a bases-loaded no-out jam by then striking out the side. I want to take a little break from my highlighted concept at this point to mention this play from Miguel Rojas, which featured a notable call from Joe Davis that had a little nod back to the 2025 World Series.
Sharply hit, diving stop, Miguel Rojas, no way! Once again, Rojas takes something from Bichette.
Once a Blue Jay, always a Blue Jay.
I love little announcer pokes and prods to other teams and players. It just adds some color to the broadcast. Hopping now to the 6th, after a 3-run home run from Andy Pajes in the 3rd. Ohtani was up with Miguel Rojas on first base, and on an 0-2, New York pitcher Craig Kimbrell spiked this curve, which sent Francisco Alvarez firing over to first base, just managing to elude Shohei in the process, with the two having a little courtesy checkup immediately after. That could have very easily went south, making it the second instance of danger in this one. But neither one of these would be the defining moment of the contest, because, you see, after Rojas was gunned out stealing, on the 2-2, the clock nearly reached 0, prompting Alvarez to call time, but his hurler hadn't realized what was happening, with the veteran literally going into his motion before, at the very last second, shutting it down. Just take a look at this screenshot. Shohei screaming, Alvarez trying desperately to get back into his crouch, and the umpire bailing, all as Kimbrell had completely separated. Thank goodness this did not end in disaster, though it still did result in the third traumatizing moment of the contest for the Japanese superstar. And after the game, which LA would end up closing out by that final score of 4-0, he would handle the whole thing by posting a picture of it to Instagram. That's something I really enjoy about Shohei personally. He's very tongue-in-cheek about these types of things, and never seems to show any degree of malice for unintentional scares. It has not been a good start to 2026 for Jazz Chisholm Jr., after proclaiming his goal of a 50-50 season around spring training, something that had a lot of eyes on him because last year was the first year he'd even went 30-30. He's proceeded to bat just .173 with a .482 OPS through his first 14 games, with 3 walks to 17 strikeouts and exactly 0 long balls. Along the way, there have been some less than ideal mental mistakes as well, though none of them nearly as high profile as what happened yesterday versus the Rays, when he was at the center of the game-losing play, and then proceeded to basically admit post-game that he didn't even understand how the rules worked. It was one hell of a game to even get to that point, though. New York and Tampa traded runs in the second inning on a home run from Austin Wells and RBI single from Johnny DeLuca. There would be no additional runs tallied until the bottom of the 6th, when, with 1 out and runners on the corners, Jonathan Ronda did what he does best, post a productive at-bat, registering a sacrifice fly, with Cody Bellinger making a nice running catch onto the track. This came just 2 batters after robbing Yandy Diaz of what would have been an RBI double by leaping at the wall. Hopping to the top of the 8th, Jazz managed to come through at the plate at the time, doubling down the right field line to put runners in second and third, eventually coming around to score on Jose Caballero's go-ahead 2-run double. This takes us to our first mental miscue, when Yandy Diaz, with the runner on third, grounded this ball to the right side, sending Ben Rice cutting over to grab it. Now, seeing as how Jazz's momentum could have easily taken him towards the bag, and Yandy is not a fast runner, they probably should have still been able to record an out here, even though the play obviously wasn't routine, but Jazz just completely shut down after it was clear he wasn't going to field it. Thankfully for New York, he would not come around to score. Jumping now to the 10th, after a Jazz pop-out to start, Caballero would give his team the lead once again, this time on a 105-mile-an-hour ground ball up the middle, setting things up perfectly for David Bednar in the bottom half. But things would quickly degrade from here, with the Rays playing some small ball to tie things up on 2 consecutive bunts, both of which were pretty much perfect, with New York not even managing to register an out on the second one. Just a little side note here, but even on this play, Chisholm was not covering second, so if Bednar decided he had no chance at the plate and just pivoted to throw to first, he would have been throwing it to an empty base. We now come to our highlighted play, when, with 1 out and the bases loaded after an intentional walk and a strikeout, Jonathan Aranda flipped this chopper to second base that Jazz came in on, and inexplicably attempted to grab and turn some sort of double play, instead of just fielding it and throwing it to the plate. Let me be clear, I don't think he had a great chance to save the game, even if he fields that cleanly, with Simpson on third, but he had absolutely 0 chance to create some sort of other play before Chandler crossing the plate beforehand. It was a puzzling decision to be sure, one that New York reporters asked him about post-game, and this was his response.
I don't know what the rule is if I went to first base first and threw it back to second if it's still an out.
No, they'll score.
They'll still score?
They'll get there before the time occurs at second.
Well, where it was what I was trying to do in my mind probably wouldn't have worked anyway.
Oh my goodness. This is a moment that makes it tough to defend the Yankees second baseman, one that reminds me of the time last year he got thrown out at first base on a routine pop-up to second. There's just no circumstance where you should, first of all, not understand what the situation is with a walk-off run on the line, and then, secondly, admit to the media that you don't know the rules in the first place. The dugout or clubhouse post-game is where you discuss that with your teammates. Don't air that out for everyone to see. Again, I will reiterate, I don't think he was going to get him even if he came to the plate. That was a 10 out of 10 difficulty play, but to know that he wasn't even going to give himself a chance because he didn't know the basic concepts of the game is not only stunning, but would be downright concerning to me if I was a Yankee fan. Entering the 2026 season, there were a few returns to action that were more anticipated than Toronto's, who was coming off of one of the most heartbreaking Game 7 losses in the history of the sport, with a team that remained strong enough to make another serious challenge at a title. But I will say a huge portion of this excitement was organized around their exceptional lineup, which figures to be one of the best in the sport. Their pitching certainly has more question marks, most notably in regards to the health of their starters. But they've come out so far in the new season, and not only managed to sweep the Sacramento Oakland A's of Las Vegas, but to do so while excelling on the mound, breaking the all-time record for strikeouts in a team's first 3 games of the season. Shout out to Craig Wilson, by the way, who pointed this out to me in an email. Game 1 housed perhaps their most impressive overall start, being that of Kevin Gausman, who threw 6 innings of 1-run baseball while giving up just a single hit and punching out 11, setting an opening day record for his squad in the process. Then, after he departed, Louis Varland would K a single batter in the 7th, and then after a scoreless and strikeoutless 8th from Tyler Rogers, Jeff Hoffman would give all of Canada some horrible flashbacks by giving up a game-tying home run with 1 out in the 9th. But he also did something else that was exceptionally rare, striking out 4 batters in the single frame. Obviously, nobody was really talking about this post-game. This meant that after the Blue Jays came out and walked off on an Andrés Giménez single in the bottom of the 9th, they had officially registered 16 Ks in their first game of the season. But this was just a warm-up for what would come next. In Game 2, it was Dylan Cease's turn to absolutely dominate, pitching 5 1/3 innings of 1-run baseball with 12 strikeouts this time, making him and Gausman the first starters in the history of the Blue Jays franchise to get at least 11 strikeouts in back-to-back games. That craziness aside, their bullpen would not be able to make what was then a slim 1-run lead stand up, giving up 5 runs in the 7th inning, with the biggest blow being a grand slam off the bat of Shea Langoliers, his second big home run in as many days. But from here, the back end of their pen would mostly lock down, going 4 1/3 innings while giving up just 1 run, with 5 strikeouts, all while their offense staged a valiant comeback, getting 2 runs in the 8th and then single tallies in the 9th, 10th, and 11th, with the final score coming on a walk-off single off the bat of Ernie Clement, securing their second straight walk-off victory. This game's grand total in strikeouts on the mound? How about 19? Utterly ridiculous. Their best overall performance would arguably come in Game 3, when Eric Lauer came out and punched out 9 over 5 1/3 innings, giving up just 2 runs on 3 hits, one of the best overall performances of his entire career when it came to getting whiffs. And unlike the first 2 contests, there would be no commotion in this one with their pen, with 4 guys combining for 3 2/3 innings of scoreless baseball, with 6 strikeouts and just 2 hits given up. Their offense simultaneously put up their best power performance of the season so far, with 3 homers, including first in the career of Kazuma Okamoto, who has looked completely comfortable out there. When it was all said and done, their final game contained another 15 strikeouts, giving them 50 versus the A's, setting an all-time record for strikeouts in the first 3 games of a team's season, which, along with the overall sweep, certainly is a hell of a way to start off for the reigning AL champions. The San Diego Padres beat the Boston Red Sox 8-6 yesterday in a game that was filled with back-and-forth action, clutch hits, and one very dominant 9th inning from the best closer in baseball. But underneath the surface, there was one play that occurred that I thought was worth detailing, because it was yet another example of Manny Machado getting away with something he probably shouldn't have, a trend he's become known for a bit over the years. Boston had stormed out to a 4-0 lead in the bottom of the 3rd, when Jarren Duran crushed a 2-run double off of former Red Sox Walker Buehler. Then Wilyer Bray and Masataka Yoshida notched back-to-back 2-out RBI extra base hits, all of which gave off-season acquisition Ranger Suarez quite a bit of breathing room. But he wouldn't be able to hold on to this very well, as nearly immediately after he gave up an RBI single to Jackson Merrill ahead of a Manny Machado knocked to left field. This put 2 guys on for Miguel Andujar, setting up our highlighted play. As it was on the 0-1 pitch that catcher Carlos Narvaez attempted to pick behind Manny, with the ball seemingly ricocheting off his body into foul territory, allowing both base runners to move up. A significant development for a guy in Suarez who doesn't strike out all that many. At first this might seem like an innocuous play, but if you take a closer look at the replay, you can see what actually happened. As the throw headed towards first, Machado intentionally raised his leg up before kicking the ball away from first baseman Wilson Contreras, an action that certainly did not amuse Narvaez. Now, the thing is, if a base runner is deemed to have intentionally put themselves in the way of an active throw, they're supposed to be out for interference. Obviously, as if you think about it, this could happen 3 or 4 times a game easily if it was allowed. But, for some reason, Machado wasn't called for it by first base ump Brian O'Nora, allowing the play to stand. And this would certainly go on to be pretty impactful, as after Andujar struck out, which would have ended the inning entirely, Xander Bogaerts would walk ahead of a Nick Castellanos 2-run single, cutting Boston's lead down to 1 run. San Diego would go on to score 3 in the next frame on a 2-out homer off the bat of, you guessed it, Machado himself, who somehow managed to crush this changeup in near his knees over the wall and left. Boston would tie the game with 2 outs in the 7th on a 2-run double from Yoshida, but this wouldn't hold very long either, with them giving up a home run to Jackson Merrill in the top of the very next inning, then allowing an insurance run on a sacrifice fly to Fernando Tatis Jr. in the 9th, which proved to be more than enough for Mason Miller, who dominated in typical Miller fashion by striking out the side for the 2nd straight game, sealing a win for the Padres, and another loss for the Red Sox as boos rained down in Fenway, with this L dropping them to just 2-7 on the young season. For as much as everybody expects umpires to be non-human robots who get every call correct, they are indeed fallible, in both attitude and eyesight occasionally as well. But once in a while you'll see a moment that reminds you they are indeed just as human as everyone else in the ball field. And we just got a great instance of this yesterday, when Bill Miller was caught on a hot mic wishing for his own call to be overturned in order to mercifully end a torturous Arizona inning. In the top of the fourth, with 2 guys on and 2 outs, Robbie Ray fired this sinker just low at 95 miles an hour, prompting Patrick Bailey to throw a challenge out there, something he's been very good at so far this spring. In fact, on a little side note, he's currently ranked 5th amongst all backstops in overturns versus expected. Anyway, just take a listen to what would follow next.
San Francisco is challenging the ball call. Please be a straight.
I'm sure some of you might be asking, why on earth would he be hoping his own call would be overturned? Isn't that a little embarrassing for an ump? And the answer to that is, in most contexts, probably. But this was a blistering 96-degree Arizona day game with very little wind to speak of. And umpires, especially those like Miller, who are getting up there in age a little bit, have to tote a lot of gear around back behind the plate, making this a pretty easy example, in my opinion, of a guy just straight up hoping for an inning to end a little sooner so he can douse himself with water and try to cool down a little bit. Both his and Bailey's reaction was the stuff of comedy gold to me as well, with Miller realizing what he did just a hair too late, and Bailey not being able to hold back some chuckles. Thankfully for Bill, the frame would end just 2 pitches later on a swinging strikeout, allowing him to indeed get the break he was so vocally rooting for. Before we go as well, I wanted to give a mini shout out to Chandler Simpson of the Tampa Bay Rays for hitting his first out-of-the-park home run in professional baseball, a 2-run go-ahead shot in the 7th inning of a then 2-1 contest. Funny enough, it was so much of a wall scraper that it actually wasn't initially recognized to be a dinger until after further review, coming in at a whopping 344 feet. Still though, it was a shocking sight to see, considering he hadn't managed to put one up since college in 2022, with his only other round tripper since that time being of the inside-the-park variety during the 2024 minor league season. The New York Mets started the 2026 season by going 7-4, a time that feels like a million years ago at this point. They were hitting well, and while there were a number of star players who began a bit slow, it didn't seem like too big a deal or anything. Ever since, things have gotten really dire. First, they lost Juan Soto to a calf injury, then they proceeded to rattle off 10 straight losses coming into yesterday's game. Yet, I'm not sure anyone was prepared for how they would lose their 11th straight, which not only featured some of the darkest irony of the year so far, but one of the most mind-numbingly stupid decisions you will ever see in a walk-off situation. Let's work our way there. Things began as they so often have in recent days, with just 1 hit being tallied through 3 innings at the dish. And it seemed like for a second the same was about to happen on the mound, with Pete Crow Armstrong lining a leadoff double in the bottom of the 3rd off David Peterson, a lefty who has been just ridiculously bad so far. To Peterson's credit, though, he would hunker down to induce a routine ground ball with the infield in, and then a 60-mile-per-hour line drive off the bat of Nico Hoerner, with it turning into a double play when PCA couldn't scramble back to the bag. But the Cubs' star center fielder would make up for this somewhat by immediately robbing Bo Bichette of what probably should have been a double on a 112-mile-per-hour missile that he just outran in straightaway center. And so, entering the 5th, it was a scoreless game, looking exactly like the kind of contest the Mets have been losing in recent days. This was when they would get a lifeline from MJ Melendez, with the lefty crushing his first home run of the year on a fastball high and away. Certainly an impressive swing. This has been part of a feel-good run for MJ, who came into the spring not even being expected to make the roster. This takes us all the way to the bottom of the 9th, as neither team could manage to score again despite some traffic from both. Devin Williams took the ball, looking to finally end what has become probably the most negative narrative in baseball at the moment. Unfortunately for Mets fans everywhere, this would not be how it went. Ian Happ immediately led off with a single, and then after Seiya Suzuki punched out on a fastball, former Met All-Star Michael Conforto, perhaps the most painfully ironic source possible, tied the game with an RBI double. Williams would manage to escape from here, setting up New York to try to get something with the ghost runner on second base, a fairly simple ask that they would not be able to accomplish, getting a pop-out, fly-out, and then after an infield single, strikeout to strand 2 runners in scoring position. Craig Kimbrell was brought out of the pen at this point, which should tell you where their bullpen depth is, immediately spiking a curveball to put the winning run at third base in Pete Crow Armstrong, who has elite speed with nobody out. Then, briefly, a glimmer of hope, a strikeout from Dansby Swanson, bringing up Nico Hoerner. This seemed to be the most obvious intentional walk of all time. Hoerner is one of the best bat-on-ball guys in the entire major leagues, and behind him was first baseman Michael Busch, who has not only struck out a decent amount this year, but has overall not been productive, with an OPS south of 500. But no intentional walk sign came from the dugout. Instead, Kimbrell was ordered to go right after him, and on the very first pitch, Nico flew a ball to right field that was just deep enough to score PCA, sending the Mets to their 11th straight loss. And things would only get worse post-game when manager Carlos Mendoza was asked about this, with him saying, quote, "In that situation, especially with Horner, you put him on first base, they're going to take second. You know there's a contact situation there, but then they have some of their best hitters coming up after that too. No, I was just going to go right after him." This is, of course, ignoring the fact that it was a walk-off situation. Who even gives a crap about the runner on second? And there's no doubt that both Bush and who would have followed him, Alex Bregman, are less of threats to put the ball in play than Nico. Losing 11 straight is one thing, but having your manager make such ridiculously stupid decisions to bring about such things has to be painful like nothing else for New York fans everywhere. Well guys, we're here. The first video of the 2026 season that specifically has to do with Shohei Ohtani breaking an MLB record. But this one is not like a lot of the others I've detailed before, or many in the baseball space have. No, this one is singular, and perhaps, maybe, his most unbreakable record that he's ever set. One hell of an accomplishment given his resume. I'll get more into what exactly that was after I detail his performance in this game versus the Mets. He began the day on the mound doing something we hadn't seen from him since 2021, not being that day's starting DH, probably just to give him a little bit extra rest. This meant that his current MLB leading 48-game on-base streak would have to wait to either get extended or ended until the next day. Keep that number in mind for a bit later on. He came out firing early on, striking out Francisco Lindor to lead off the ballgame, then Francisco Alvarez in the second, getting a little help in between from Andy Pajes in center. Offensively, he would get his only support until the middle frames on a Hye-Sung Kim 2-run home run, his first of the year in the bottom of the second. Perhaps this helped him reach another gear, as in the third, he would work around a one-out double from MJ Melendez to punch out the side, with the final pitch being a hesitation 100-mile-per-hour heater right past Francisco Lindor. This was part of a trend on the day. His velocity was notably up, perhaps at least partially a product of him not having to hit. Another 1-2-3 inning in the fourth, which featured another strikeout, this time on a curveball, was followed by his only troublesome inning, the fifth, when he walked 2 batters, with his sliding force-out from Teoscar Hernandez being the only thing keeping the bases from being loaded with nobody out. Melendez, a hitter who came into the game 0 for 5 with 4 strikeouts versus the righty, then proceeded to make him pay, registering his second extra base hit on the night to drive in New York's first run. Mercifully for Ohtani, though, the ball bounced over the fence, keeping the damage at 1. And then, like all aces are capable of, he clamped down, punching out Tommy Pham on 3 pitches, the last of which was 100 miles an hour, and then inducing a line out from Francisco Lindor on another triple-digit heater. His final frame, the 6th, was easily his most impressive on the entire day, punching out the side in order this time with 3 separate pitches, being a high 90s heater, looping slow curve at 72 miles an hour, and dastardly splitter, finishing his day with 6 innings pitched with 2 walks, 2 hits allowed, 1 earned run, and 10 strikeouts. The Dodgers would go on to get another run from Teoscar Hernandez in the bottom of that frame, and then 5 more in the 8th, with the biggest blast being a grand slam from Dalton Rushing, the guy who actually took Shohei's spot as DH on the day. Just a little FYI, but this year, Rushing is hitting .529 so far, with a nearly 2,000 OPS. When it was all said and done, LA had wrapped up an 8-2 victory, with Ohtani getting the win, as well as putting an exclamation point at the end of the alluded-to record I mentioned in the intro, which was partially detailed by OptaStats on Twitter, when they said, Shohei Ohtani has a 48-game on-base streak. He also had a streak of 32 2/3 innings pitched without an earned run snapped tonight. Since earned runs became official in 1913, the only other MLB player with a 30-plus game on-base streak and 30-plus inning streak without an earned run at any point in his career is Babe Ruth. This might seem confusing. If Babe Ruth did it before, how is it a record? Well, the key phrase here is at any point in their career. No one in the history of the sport has ever managed to maintain a 30-plus inning stretch without an earned run and 30-plus game on-base streak at the same time. In fact, no one's done this for 20 games. It's downright ludicrous. Think about it. This is top 3 hitter in the game stuff combined with top 10 starter activities, something that is not only unprecedented, but even after all these years of him doing it, hard to even believe is possible. Pretty much nothing has gone right for the Boston Red Sox so far in 2026. Not only have they lost at this point 4 out of their first 5 games, they've also done so while being outscored by 15 runs, and yesterday was no different, losing by a final of 9-2 in a contest that just never felt all that close. But there was a moment in this one that perhaps encapsulated their struggles better than any other, when they literally ended an inning with a strikeout, yet just kept on playing, resulting in the guy they had just legitimately K'd, reaching on a walk. They were already trailing 5-1 in the bottom of the 5th, courtesy of 2 ringing extra base hits off the bat of Yordon Alvarez, and a couple clutch 2-out knocks from Christian Walker and Joey Loperfido, the latter of which came just before our highlighted at-bat, with Cam Smith at the plate, swinging and missing at a first-pitch breaking ball, before again doing the same on an identical offering. However, in the process of the second one, Joey took off from first, drawing a throw from catcher Connor Wong that skipped into Marcelo Meyer, setting off a chain of events that not only allowed the young outfielder to be safe at second, but to scamper all the way to third after a scrambling throw from Marcelo went off the glove of an inexplicably diving Brian Bayo, allowing Walker to score from third as well. This is probably what destabilized their perspective on the count, because the very next offering would see Smith swing and miss again. Now, if you were counting, that should have been strike 3. The inning should have been over, and Bayo should have been able to make his way through 5 tumultuous innings. But, for some reason, literally nobody on the entire umpiring crew remembered the count, and nobody on the Red Sox did either, so Cam was just allowed to stay at the plate. I will say the Astros didn't flinch in the slightest as well, but I can't necessarily assume that they didn't know, because it wouldn't have been in their favor to point it out. This created one of the weirder looking live box trackers you'll ever see, as by the end of it, when Smith drew a walk on the 9th pitch of the at-bat, the count was considered to be 3-6. This was the final batter of the day for Brian as well. Again, the frame should have ended in him walking off the mound with a K, but instead he had to depart with runners in the corners. Houston wouldn't end up scoring any more in the 5th, but they would manage to tack on 3 more before the contest concluded, with the most notable additional run coming off the bat of Cam himself, who launched his first home run of the season in the 7th inning. And again, like I said, they not only would end up losing this one by a final score of 9-2, but then follow it by dropping their first game in April as well, 6-4, getting swept by Houston in the process. It's a well-known fact in Major League Baseball circles that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is one of the strongest players we've ever measured in a metric capacity, being one of just 7 guys on record with a batted ball over 120 miles an hour, while routinely ranking amongst the hardest-hitting players in the sport generally. Yet he still did something today that surprised me, and absolutely blew me away in terms of its raw impressiveness and overall rarity. He one-handed a ball nearly 400 feet on the fly. Facing the Marlins immediately after Miles Straw took this harsh dive into third base, which, I mean, just look at that. I can't imagine the kind of razzing he had to take from his teammates after getting back to the dugout. Guerrero led off his AB with an absolute G-hack, swinging as hard as he possibly could while fouling it back. A quality take on a fastball inside was then followed by a comparatively weaker swing on a fastball. The 1-2 would see him take a slider just off the plate away, which perhaps put the idea of that pitch in that location in his head firmly, because in the very next offering, he would essentially get a duplicate, crushing it 383 feet to left field, seeing it hit high off the fence and left, missing a long ball by maybe 5 feet, while driving in a run and pushing Dalton Varsho, who was on first, up to third base. But, of course, it's not the box score result that's notable here, instead being how it happened. Just take a look at hurler Ryan Gusto's reaction. He couldn't believe what he had just saw, which was, in no uncertain terms, Guerrero Jr. launching a ball one-handed, nearly 400 feet to left field, at an exit velocity of 99.1 miles per hour. For anyone out there who's going to say, that wasn't a one-handed swing, it was more so on the follow-through. Check out what the Blue Jays' own announcer had to say regarding the hack.
Check out this swing, one-handed, his weight is on the front side, he's totally fooled, watch him lose his front side, look at that back leg stuck into the ground, that's an indicator that you're fooled. He hits it on the barrel, still hits it off the wall.
I think that's good enough for me. If Vladdy can just manage to get the ball in the air a little bit more this year, he could easily make a run at 40 long balls for the first time since 2021, and it's the kind of power he just showed on this swing, that's the reason why. As for the rest of the game, the Blue Jays would go on to lose to Miami, blowing a 5-run lead late after the minor league portion of both squads entered in the back half of the game, dropping Toronto's spring record, quite inconsequentially, to 1-4. As most of you should probably know by now, it's 2026, and as such, things like spiking opposing players or publicly threatening them after a mild incident are a bit out of vogue. That's something you'd expect to see from the 1970s, not in the era of exit velocity and launch angles. But Wilson Contreras yesterday threw us back to the olden days when he got hit by a pitch in a circumstance that he most certainly was not being aimed at in, and then proceeded to go on a rampage, both on the field and after the game ended, off of it as well. Wilson was facing off against the Brewers in a contest that his squad very much needed to have, as they had started the year just 2-7, and he helped contribute to a decent start in the first when he drew a walk ahead of a Trevor Story RBI single, which, despite some major base runners from both squads entering the bottom of the third, was the only run that it scored. It's at this point we ran into our first major play, when with 2 guys on and nobody out, Brandon Woodruff ran a 93-mile-per-hour sinker high and inside on Contreras, clipping him in the process, though not without a subsequent review from the Brew Crew to confirm that it had done so. But the fact that it was obviously borderline certainly did not dissuade Wilson, who was absolutely incensed, screaming at the pitcher from first base after doing so in the batter's box as well. As much as this is, on its face, a bit stupid considering the circumstances that made no sense for him to get targeted in, I do understand his sentiment to some degree, because, you see, this is not his first time he's gotten hit by a pitch from Milwaukee. In fact, it was the 24th in just 121 games played against. For a little reference, that is roughly 20% of the total hit by pitches he's ever taken. This is not to defend what he would do next, however, when Julio Abreu grounded a ball up the middle, where Bryce Turang and David Hamilton, a Red Sox player just last year, attempted a turn two, only to see Contreras go into the bag spikes up, shaking up Hamilton in the process. Again, I get being frustrated, but to go after someone who was just simply trying to turn a double play in that overt of a fashion seemed a bit extreme. By the time he came up again in the bottom of the fourth, the game was tied, with Milwaukee having stormed back, something he managed to undo himself with a ground rule double down the right field line. You know that had to be gratifying for him, as was his single in the seventh against Aaron Ashby, which at the time put 2 runners on with the contest again tied, giving Boston a golden opportunity to go ahead. But they would not manage to take it, registering 3 straight flyouts to strand them without moving up. This left the door cracked open, and the Brewers would run right through it with 2 outs in the top of the 8th, when Garrett Mitchell drove in a run on a line drive to Roman Anthony, who then made a throw so bad to home plate that it allowed Christian Yelich to score from first base. His downright pool noodle of an arm will not stay out of the headlines. Milwaukee would tack on 1 more and a single in the top of the 9th, effectively sealing a victory with how good their bullpen is. This wouldn't stop Contreras, however, from launching a long ball with 2 outs in the bottom half, further cementing what ended up being a 3-for-3 night for the veteran to go along with a walk and that hit by pitch. 2 batters later, the game was over following a Trevor Story groundout, with the Red Sox now being a concerning 2-8, with the Brewers, impressively, being the exact inverse of this, at 8-2. This is not where our story would end, though, because, you see, after the game, Wilson had this to say.
It's not just a hit by pitch, that's the 24th time that they hit me in my career, 24th. And they always say, I'm not trying to hit you. That get old. So next time they hit me again, I'm going to take one of them out. That's what happened. That's a message. That
is indeed a very public threat towards another team, which, again, given the number of hit by pitches, I kind of understand, but it still does seem aggressive considering the circumstances of this latest one, as well as the fact that he got his get back right after that on a hard slide. I guess we'll just have to see how things play out from here, because this was just game 1 of a 3-game series. I made a video about Munetaka Murakami crushing what was, at the time, his 6th home run of the year a couple days back, when he launched what was estimated to be a 431-foot dinger that may have encountered some interference because of the batter's eye in center, causing its estimated distance, per StatCast, to perhaps be a bit stunted. Yet there was nothing historic about this moment, with it more so being a statistical oddity I thought was worth detailing. You could not say the same, however, of what he accomplished just 2 days later, something so ridiculous we had only seen it once before in all of recorded MLB history. Munetaka was at the plate in a then 4-1 contest in the top of the 5th, facing off against the Oakland Sacramento A's of Las Vegas, a team in which he'd already homered in back-to-back nights against. And it would be the same story here, with him getting a hanging slider right down the middle from lefty Jeffrey Springs, launching it at 114 miles an hour to right field, with it traveling an estimated 425 feet, making the score, at the time, 6-1. This gave him his second streak of at least 3+ games to the home run within his first 22 career games, something that only 2017 Rhys Hoskins had ever managed to do before. That's right, not Aaron Judge, Mike Trout, Albert Pujols, Barry Bonds, or even players like Pete Alonso or Gary Sanchez, who got off to such fast starts in the last decade, ever managed to do what Murakami had done. But this isn't where the statistical impressiveness ends. Big shout out to Sarah Langs for all the stuff I'm going to mention today, by the way. She's one of the best follows on Twitter you can possibly have. Those 8 long balls are also the most ever registered by a Japanese-born player in his first 22 contests. And the cherry on top of it all, he became the first player ever on record to have 5 or more home runs and 20+ walks in that same span of 22 games to begin a career. Now, does this mean he's basically a lock to win Rookie of the Year or something? Not necessarily. He certainly has his warts as a player, and they're pretty much what everybody expected coming into the season, leading to one of the most extreme baseball savant pages you will ever see. Just look at that. The quality of contact metrics are bright red, but with that accompanying whiff percent of 41.7. which is easily in the first percentile in Major League Baseball, with only somehow Luke Raley and Matt Wallner being ahead of him. A little side note, but holy moly, Raley. For a little context as to how ridiculous this whiff percentage truly is, consider that prime Joey Gallo in 2018 saw his be almost a full percentage point better than that of Munetaka. Something that should be encouraging though for White Sox fans is the fact that his walk rate of 21.5% is also significantly better than anything Joey ever managed to draw. When it's all said and done, I think we're going to have one of the most polarizing rookie seasons on record, as he could easily surpass 220 strikeouts and 40 homers, while hitting right around 200 with an on-base percentage north of 350. As somebody who enjoys the bizarre in baseball more than almost anything, I really hope that he can get to these extreme territories, and potentially, in the process, pick up some real Rookie of the Year support. Alright everybody, if you made it this far, I appreciate you watching, and if you did, consider checking out any of these other videos on your screen right now for other content just like this. Also, if you ever see anything you'd like to see me detail in the video, feel free to reach out to my email, basebpoet@gmail.com, and if I end up using your idea, I'll give you a shout out. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Every year there's a number of moronic plays that take place that have a team's fan base face-palming so hard it leaves a handprint, even in spring training when the games don't actually count. And we saw exactly one of these moments today in a contest between the Cubs and Giants, when a triple play took place on a single to right field. You heard me correctly. 3 outs were recorded on a routine base knock to the outfield, and the manner in which it came about was so unexpected it prompted the iconic announcer calling the game, John Miller, to call out the player mainly to blame in a hilariously honest way. The game began in about as unusual fashion as possible, as before we even saw anything in terms of play on the field, there was a delay when there was a fire alarm that went off caused by some fan apparently smoking on premises. This came shortly before our titular character, Matt Shaw, would draw a walk, getting pushed up to second when Alex Bregman did the same. It was here that we would see our highlighted moment, when Seiya Suzuki flipped a 2-1 fastball just over the head of Luis Ariz in right field, with Shaw getting a fairly bad read on it, resulting in him only getting up to third. This created some chaos, as Suzuki, assuming the play was probably going to go to that bag, took off for second, getting thrown out by Rafael Devers, leaving Bregman to make his own way slowly to third base, where he was tagged out because there was already someone there. That left Shaw safe on the bag, but for some reason, the sophomore infielder decided to just leave it anyway, apparently assuming he'd been tagged out, creating a triple play out of thin air for the Giants, drawing a surprised reaction from pretty much all of their players. Miller also had this to say.
And now the runner at third leaves the base, and he's going to be tagged out. It's a triple play to end the inning. Oh, wow. Matt Shaw made a boneheaded rookie mistake there. Bregman was the guy who got called out. He left the bag, and then Shaw left the bag as well. And then the coaches there said, where are you going? Get back over there. As Chapman walked over and tagged him out. Triple play. Unbelievable.
It's not often you hear an announcer call something boneheaded on a big league field, but considering what he had just witnessed, I do think it was appropriate. I really have no idea what Matt was thinking here. Pretty much anybody who knows the rules of baseball should know that he was safe right where he was, but hey, at least it's spring, so all this is going to end up being is a funny footnote instead of some kind of highlight to be added to a year-end list of empty-brained maneuvers. The Giants would eventually end up winning this one by a final score of 4-2, with one more element of weirdness being that only 1 run in the entire contest was scored on a hit. This RBI single from Will Brennan. The rest were on field outs and a wild pitch. We've been seeing a number of interesting ABS moments to start the season, because of course we'd never seen its implementation in Major League Baseball before, and I've been doing my best to cover the most notable. But among the hundreds that have already been issued, with varying degrees of success, none of them contain quite what Nick Gonzalez managed to put up in the 7th inning of a game versus the Cubs today, when he initiated a challenge and then tried to cancel it, only to have the home plate umpire force him to go through with it, all leading to a welcome surprise. Pittsburgh was up 2-0 in this one, courtesy of a 2-run home run in the 7th inning off the bat of Brian Reynolds, a shot that was immediately followed by a sliding catch in right center field by Pete Crow Armstrong, a play that had a catch probability of just 10%. After all this action, Nick came up to the plate, and quickly got down 0-2 before taking this fastball away for a called strike 3. It was then he attempted a challenge, but then thought better of it midway through, seemingly then pivoting to cancel it, and getting frustrated at home plate ump Roberto Ortiz, who then refused to allow him to do so. This was because his team only had 1 challenge left, and he'd probably been informed not to issue any on pitches that weren't clearly balls, or in circumstances that were high stakes. Obviously, we've never seen a hitter attempt to cancel their challenge mid-stride back to the dugout before, so that's notable, but what's perhaps even more hilarious is the fact that it ended up getting overturned, not only allowing Pittsburgh to keep their ABS bullet, but also giving Gonzalez new life. And he would use this to work reliever Caleb Thielbar for an additional 4 pitches, eventually flying out to left field in an 8-pitch at-bat. What an interesting moment in what was otherwise a fairly nondescript game, one that would eventually end by a final score of 2-0. Helping the Pirates to win their 8th game of the season, a relatively sizzling start in comparison to years past. And now, before we go, I wanted to do a little mini segment on this pitch getting overturned in the Padres-Rockies game yesterday, one that offers a great example of displaying exactly why us as baseball fans that like ABS feel the way we do. Just look at a miss like that. In previous years, there would be absolutely nothing you could do about it, even though we watching the broadcast could see that it was basically right down the middle. There's really nothing negative that can come out of allowing something like that to be overturned, even if we still inevitably are working out the kinks a little bit. Matt Chapman has been one of the best defensive third basemen we've ever seen, as since he made his debut back in 2017, he's racked up 109 defensive runs saved, the second highest total in the entire sport, to go along with 71 outs above average, the 11th best. I mention this to give a little context as to why he was probably extremely frustrated with his teammate Casey Schmidt making a semi-routine error. His response, though, was not what I would consider to be ideal. San Francisco was already down 1-0 in the bottom of the 5th with Xander Bogaerts to the plate, with the righty dribbling an 0-1 weakly towards third base, sending Chapman racing in to grab it and then fire on the run. But Schmidt, who's only spent 24 total games at first base, wasn't able to corral what was a somewhat high toss, allowing it to get past him, trickling into foul territory, scoring a run and pushing both base runners up to second and third. As you can see in the replay, he almost tries to extend out to grab the toss at the same time as he was trying to catch it, resulting in it tipping off the end of his mitt in the process. I thought the warmonger on Twitter had a really good read of the whole thing when he said, "Few things in baseball are more overrated than first baseman striding forward. It gains very little time and crushes your catch radius. Experienced first basemen know this, and learned it pretty young. It's far more important to stay back and maintain a bigger catch radius." With that context, look at that one more time. If he stays back a little bit, maintaining a strong posture, he could have grabbed it and almost certainly would have still had enough time to beat Bogaerts. But again, I will reiterate, this is the guy's 24th game at that position, so frankly, it kinda makes sense to me that he would be someone without this knowledge. This didn't stop Chapman, however, from chastising him right out in the open where a camera could see, saying to him with an easy lip read as the infield met at the mound, "Catch the effing ball," and then he reiterated it one more time. Schmidt, to his credit, did not give a response, standing there, taking his lumps, before returning to his respective position. I personally am not a big fan of this kind of behavior. It's clear Casey would have preferred to do exactly what Matt was asking of him, and making such an obvious request does nothing but to alienate your teammates, especially when the public could see it, as this, of course, went viral after. Thankfully for San Francisco, the bleeding would be cut off just one pitch later, when Jung-Hoo Lee made this falling catch on a sinking line drive to right. And overall, I would say the play ended up being rendered somewhat moot, as they would go on to lose this one by a final score of 7-1, after they coughed up 1 in the 6th and 4 more in the 8th, making it their 4th game out of their first 6, where they scored 1 or less runs, bringing their cumulative record to 2-4. The New York Yankees are off to a ridiculously good start so far in 2026. Not only going 6-1 through their first 7 games, but doing so while setting or tying multiple records, such as the lowest starter's ERA through the first 6 games of a season ever tracked, and the lowest total of earned runs permitted through their first 7 games in MLB history, along with 2002 Giants and 1993 Braves. But while their performance on the mound certainly has been the most notable piece of 2026 so far, I wanted to put the focal point on a catch today that occurred in the 9th inning of their 8-2 victory against Miami, when Cody Bellinger pulled off one of the best juggling grabs you will ever see on an MLB field. The Yankee offense got started quickly in this one, coming out and dropping 4 runs in the first 2 innings on a home run from Aaron Judge in the first, and then a couple free bases with the bags juiced in the second on a walk and hit by pitch. And then, like has been par for the course so far this season, starter Will Warren would make it hold up, only permitting 2 earned runs through his 5 2/3 innings of work on 2 solo homers. Afterwards, their bullpen went completely scoreless, all while the bats continued to hack away, tacking on runs in the 6th, 7th, and 8th, with the most notable swings coming off the bat of Ben Rice, who recorded 3 RBIs in this time frame, with a homer and 2-run double. And so, entering the 9th, it looked like yet another dominant, if somewhat nondescript victory for the men in pinstripes. But there was still one ridiculous play yet to occur. Because, you see, leading off this inning was Xavier Edwards, owner of one of the 2 solo homers in the day, and he proceeded to crush a 1-1 cutter to left, driving Cody Bellinger back towards the warning track, where he leapt, saw the ball go off his mitt, and then, all in one motion, grabbed it on the backhand on the way down. Now, at first glance, this might have seemed impressive, but not necessarily all that notable. But just take a look at this replay. It hits off the palm of his mitt, and then as it goes to fall, he just sticks his glove out there and secures it. A move so unlikely to work that even he couldn't believe that he pulled it off. And I have to agree, every year there are a couple defensive plays that just blow my mind, and this is probably the first one of 2026 to do so. Look at this alternate angle. To have the body coordination to, while the ball is falling out of your mitt, mid-leap, adjust, and still manage to secure it is simply ludicrous. Shortly after, the game concluded on a much easier play for Cody, securing an 8-2 win for the Bronx Bombers, as they continue one of their hotter starts to a campaign we've seen in recent years. And now, before we go, I also wanted to give a mini shout out to one of the funnier reactions from an umpire to an ABS challenge we've seen so far this season, when Alfonso Marquez called this pitch a strike versus Trent Grisham, that was subsequently overturned, with him looking downright shocked, and then seeming to say, "That's not even close. Holy cow." You just love when umps are self-aware and not embarrassed to be wrong once in a while. It certainly makes it easier to stomach than them being excessively prideful or something. Okay guys, I'm really at a loss for how to open this video. Do I go over the level of struggle that's been taking place for the Mets in the last couple of weeks? Do I detail how horrible their offense has been, or how bad the bullpen is, or how they lack essential defensive fundamentals at key times? Do I mention a few key injuries that have played a part? Or do I just hop into what amounts to another dreary loss, this time with an accompanying mockery from the opposing team they just got beat by? Based on the amount of spilled ink that's been dedicated to this team in recent days, I think I'll just go with the last option. I'm not even sure if they deserve a full deep dive right now after all. Things began as they typically have on a day that Nolan McLean starts, a dominant showing by the young righty being followed by pitiful at-bats, with Nolan striking out 7 batters across 3 perfect frames to open this one, utilizing his elite 4-pitch mix to great effectiveness, while his team put up just 1 base runner in the first 2 frames. In the bottom of the third, some life would be shown, with Mark Vientos singling, Marcus Semien drawing a walk, and then, for just the second time this year, Francisco Lindor crushing a home run on a fastball that ended up right down the middle of the plate. Just a side note, but man, when is the broadcast going to let the grimace stuff go, guys? This team needs a new mascot at this point. They ate again in the fourth, get 2 guys on with 2 outs, but not managed to do anything with it, with Carson Bench flying out to right field. Still, it seemed like the bats had some life, right? Well, what if I were to tell you that they would not register a single hit on from this point of the game? You probably wouldn't be surprised, but it's still shocking nonetheless. Back to the pitching side of things, McLean really gave it his all, taking a perfect game into the 6th before allowing his first base runner on a single, and then with 2 outs, he gave up a crushing blow, a Byron Buxton home run on a 3-1 cutter. In most normal circumstances, a 2-run dinger with a 3-run lead would have been concerning, but not debilitating. After all, his team was still in front. However, I'm pretty sure every Mets fan in that stadium knew exactly what was coming, and their worst fears would be realized when Luke Chisholm tied the game up in the very next frame, putting up an RBI single off of fading Nolan. This is the worst part of something like this losing streak. He still was overall elite on the night, with 10 strikeouts and just 3 runs allowed through 6 2/3 innings. But absolutely nobody will remember this because of what would transpire after. I'm of course talking about that horrible 9th inning, which took place after yet another no-show from the offense in the 8th, with Devin Williams continuing to be one of the biggest disappointments of the season so far, not managing to retire even a single one of the 5 batters he faced, eventually coughing up 2 more on another RBI knock from Chisholm, and a bases-loaded walk to Matt Wallner. Do you want to know what kind of mood Mets fans were in at this point? The kind of dark humor present? After journeyman Austin Warren was brought on to replace Williams, he struck out his first batter, Royce Lewis, on a fastball, and he started hearing this from the home crowd.
And now they're chanting MVP.
You gotta love New York. I don't care what anybody says.
To his credit, he would go on to punch out the side, not allowing another tally despite coming in the worst situation a reliever possibly can. You would hope this would give New York some momentum to mount a comeback, but they could do no such thing, with Cole Sands retiring the side 1-2-3, including striking out the final batter, Tyrone Taylor. That made it an even dozen straight losses for a team with the 2nd highest payroll in baseball. And the embarrassment wasn't over yet. You see, the Twins social media team posted an image saying, quote, "Things you can get in a dozen: eggs, roses, Mets losses," along with the score. This struck such a chord in the baseball community, it went mega viral, garnering over 3.3 million views on Twitter in its first 14 hours. That is a tough pill to swallow, but perhaps not quite as tough as literally going what is at this point 15 days without a victory. Mike Trout had a red-hot start to the 2026 season, absolutely decimating the Astros in his first series with a barrage of home runs, singles, and, of course, walks. But after this, he'd begin to struggle a bit, with his batting average sinking as low as 174 at the beginning of a series versus the Reds. He did pull it around a bit to end that 3-game set, recording 2 hits and 3 runs in the final contest, which perhaps gave him a bit of momentum heading into Anaheim's series against the Yankees. However, I don't think anybody could have predicted what would come to pass, when he not only would go toe-to-toe with the fellow 3-time MVP, but outright steal the show entirely by doing something we hadn't seen from any MLB player since Babe Ruth in 1921. I'm going to go through his performances in each of the 4 games, while generally addressing what happened otherwise. Something I will get out of the way before we start is that Aaron Judge had an insane stretch as well, hitting 4 home runs, but this video isn't about him, so that's the last I'll mention of it specifically. Kicking off Game 1, which turned into an absolute knockdown, drag-out slugfest, Trout got off to an unceremonious start, grounding out weakly to first baseman Paul Goldschmidt, a part of what was a pretty slow start for the Halos, who were down 4-0 by the time Trout came up in the 4th. And while he would get on base this time, it was not in a way that reflected nicely on his stats, as he reached on a fielding error from shortstop Jose Caballero. Though he did hit the ball 99 miles an hour, so that's something. This takes us to our first sighting of MVP Trout, in the top of the 6th, when He came up with 2 guys on and proceeded to launch a 421-foot SAR bomba to left center field, knotting things back up with 1 swing of the bat. But we weren't done yet. He was back at in the top of the 8th, going deep to a very similar spot, with this one traveling an additional 24 feet, coming in at 445. That probably should have been enough to win it for his team, as this gave them a 2-run lead late. But as Jordan Romano has done so commonly in his career against the Bronx Bombers, he completely coughed it up, not even being able to record a single out in the 9th, with the big hits against him being a game-tying home run off the bat of Trent Grisham, then a double from Caballero, who'd eventually come around to score the walk-off run on a wild pitch. Still, for Trout, it was a fine day, 2 for 5 with 2 long balls, 5 RBI, and 3 runs scored. Game 2 would start exactly the same way for the Fishman, with his hardest home run so far, a 110-mile-an-hour exit velo, 432-foot shot to more so straightaway center, getting Anaheim out to a 1-0 lead. One that would swell all the way to 3-0 after Joe Adell and Jorge Soler followed Mike with home runs of their own, allowing the team to register back-to-back-to-back home runs for the first time since 2023. He would then work a 12-pitch at-bat in the top of the 2nd, one that would end with an eventual called strike 3. With the same fate being registered in the top of the 5th, this time with 8 offerings having been seen. A hard hit lineout and grounded into double play would end up capping off what was his worst game of the series. A 1 for 5 performance with 2 Ks and that home run. The Angels, though, came through around him en route to a 7-1 victory. Game 3 was another crazy contest that in some ways was eerily similar to Game 1, with the Yankees again getting out to a lead early, with the score being 3-0 by the end of the 2nd, then Anaheim responding by chipping away as the game wore on, though without the help of Trout early, who flew out and struck out in his first 2 at-bats. This, however, would be the extent of New York's ability to hold the superstar down, as in the 5th, after teammate Logan O'Hoppe had homered 2 batters before to make it a 1-run game. He gave his team the lead with his only opposite field blast in the video, as well as his only one beneath 400 feet, with this 383-foot shot carrying the short portion right by a decent margin, making the score 4-3. And this managed to hold all the way to the bottom of the 8th, with, in the meantime, him registering another single to left field that Zach Neto ended up being thrown out at 3rd on. Again, Romano was called on, and again, he would blow it. A dropped pop-up gave New York some life following a tremendous catch from Bryce Teodosio, with Caballero eventually walking things off with a 2-run double, fielded by none other than Mike himself. Nonetheless, it was another 2 for 4 performance with a long ball, 2 RBIs, and a run scored. Anaheim came into Game 4 looking for a split, and this time it was their turn to get out to an early lead, with Oswald Peraza going deep against his former team, in a frame that also saw Trout work a 6-pitch flyout versus Max Fried. The Yankees chipped away at this in an effort that was helped by a blast from Judge, eventually taking the reins back on a 2-run home run from Giancarlo Stanton. Trout, meanwhile, would both draw a walk in the top of the 3rd, and then eventually, with 1 out in the 6th, help catalyze a rally by doing the same thing once again, with his team taking the lead by scoring 4 runs. His biggest impact was still yet to come, however, as in the top of the 7th, again with 1 out, he would put an exclamation mark on his historic performance by blasting his longest and hardest hit home run of the series, a 446-foot shot that left his bat at 115 miles an hour. His last AB would come in the top of the 8th when he was intentionally walked, immediately in front of a grand slam from Joe Adell, his second home run of the series as well, which made the score 11-4, which would end up being the final. His final box score looked a bit peculiar in this one if you're not used to his patient ways. 1 for 2 with 3 runs, an RBI, and 3 walks drawn. Add all of it together and you get a series in which he went 6 for 15 with 5 home runs, 9 RBI, 8 runs scored, and 3 walks. And if that sounds impressive and perhaps historic, it certainly was, with OptaStats on Twitter pointing out following that the only other hitter to put up numbers like this in any 4-game series at any location was Babe Ruth against the Tigers at the Polo Grounds in 1921. This helped his overall wins above replacement on the season reach 1.4 already, which, crazy enough, means he's only 0.1 behind what he managed to do last season in 111 less games. We may indeed be seeing the return of All-Star Trout, and, dare I say it, perhaps even the MVP version, if he can just stay healthy going forward. I literally just made a video about CB Buckner having 6 of his calls overturned, getting so frustrated in the process that he took it out on Trevor Story's check swing late in the game by not even asking for an appeal. I think it was reasonable to believe that this would be the most overturns for a minute. I mean, after all, having 6 pitches reversed is a hell of a negative feat. But we somehow saw even more than this just 1 day later when 7 calls were overturned in a performance that really wasn't all that much better than Buckner's. Chris Siegel was behind the plate in a matchup between the Twins and Orioles, pretty quickly having one of his calls challenged in the first inning when Byron Buxton wanted a second look at this cutter. Unfortunately for Buxton, it was confirmed, getting the day off to a relatively decent start for Siegel. Our next challenge would not be, believe it or not, until the 4th inning, with the Minnesota offense in the meantime pushing across 4 runs in the top of the 2nd on an RBI single from Trevor Larnach and bases loaded double from Tristan Gray. In that 4th inning, that also featured 3 Baltimore runs on the back of a 3-run Tyler O'Neill shot, Victor Caratini got this fastball overturned from a ball to a strike, with it being nearly 2 inches inside the zone. It was the same story in the 5th, this time with McGonigle on the hill, delivering a 3-2 fastball that clipped the zone by a less substantial amount, but regardless was indeed overturned. This kicked us into a period in the 6th, in which we would see 7 challenges in the game's final 3.5 innings, with Samuel Basallo getting this ball overturned to a strike by less than 0.1 inches versus Matt Woolner. In the bottom half, the Orioles would take the lead on a 2-run double from Dylan Beavers. The 7th would feature 4 separate challenges alone, with this breaking ball being upheld versus Byron Buxton, then this strike being overturned against Woolner. It was then that we would see our funniest challenge of the day, when Matt burned his team's final ABS privilege by challenging a called strike that was more than 3 inches inside the zone, one of the worst pitches we've seen looked at so far this season. The Twins, however, still had managed to scratch out a run on an earlier Royce Lewis homer, so we were all tied up. But not for long. The Orioles would push across 3 runs in the bottom of the 7th, aided in part by a 2-1 pitch being overturned versus Pete Alonso ahead of his RBI single, then subsequent run-scoring knocks from Adley Rutschman and Kobe Mayo. This takes us to our manager freakout, which happened in the 9th inning, when, with 1 out and a runner on first, Josh Bell worked a 3-0 count before seeing what would have been ball 4 get overturned to strike 1, and then on the 3-2, a slider that again would have been ball 4 get reversed to an at-bat ending strikeout. That was enough for Derek Shelton to come roaring out of the dugout, screaming his head off about the whole thing, prompting this hilarious call from the Orioles broadcast.
And Derek Shelton's been thrown out! He's arguing with the robots! You can't defeat the robots!
Now, to be clear, he wasn't saying he was mad about the pitch getting overturned, instead being that Ryan Helsley, apparently, according to him, hadn't got the challenge off in time. I will, however, contend that I think it was largely as a result of a frustration with the general system, because, as you can see on this chart, the final 5 calls had all went against Minnesota, and I really don't know how much quicker Ryan could have challenged that. He literally had just delivered the pitch, and then, almost immediately, went to tap his cap. In my opinion, this just looked like anger boiling over. Shortly after, James Outman would fly out to Taylor Ward in left field, securing a series win for Baltimore, as well as putting the finishing touches on what ended up being a pretty abysmal performance for home plate ump Siegel, who not only had 10 of his individual calls challenged, with 7 of them being overturned, but also an overall accuracy percent of 89. 4.7 below what was expected, with him missing 19 total calls on the day. While it might not have been as bad as what Buckner did shortly before, I would still be willing to wager that it will be amongst the year's worst performances by season's end. The Dodgers and Blue Jays had one of the best World Series we've ever seen in 2025, with it ending in about as heartbreaking a fashion as possible for Toronto. I'm not going to get more into it than that, but suffice to say, I think they wanted to have a good series against LA in their first face-off since. But that was indeed not the case in Game 1. When the guys in blue not only beat them, but did so by such an extreme margin that they actually had a familiar face closing things out in the 9th. Things got started pretty quick in this one, with Teoscar Hernandez crushing a 2-out, 2-run home run when Max Scherzer left his slider right down the middle of the plate. The Blue Jays would strike back quickly on a single from Ernie Clement, but wouldn't be able to get anything else, and not just in that frame, for the next 7. Meanwhile, after Scherzer departed with an injury, Freddie Freeman launched a 2-run shot in the 3rd, one of his longest in years, at a staggering 438 feet and 109 miles an hour off the bat. Even in year 17 of his career, he still has some major pop. It was at this point they started consistently scoring, so let me break it down inning by inning. In the 4th, they got a sacrifice fly from Kyle Tucker, one of the few Dodgers who actually wasn't on the team last year in the Fall Classic, then a run on a double play off the bat of Alex Freeman in the 5th. The 6th would contain their 2nd most runs scored in any single frame, as Shohei Ohtani went deep, along with Andy Pajes registering a 2-run double. The 7th would manage to surpass this total by 1, when they scored 4 on a Dalton Rushing homer, Freddie Freeman double, and Teoscar Hernandez single. By the end of the 8th, after Rushing crushed his 2nd home run of the ballgame, the score was laughably out of reach at 14-1. This prompted Dave Roberts to do something interesting in the 9th, bringing in utility man Miguel Rojas, the hero from Game 7, to close things out on the mound, saving himself a bullpen arm in the process, and perhaps rubbing in the narrative a little bit. And to Miguel's credit, he made his manager look smart, loading the bases with nobody out before retiring the next 3 with little issue, eventually putting a bow on one of the bigger blowouts of 2026 so far, helping the Dodgers to get out to an impressive 8-2 start, while dropping the Blue Jays to just 4-6 after they had started the season 3-0. Before we go as well, I just wanted to share a little update on Cody Ponce of the Toronto Blue Jays, who I made a video about a couple days back when he was injured trying to field his ground ball versus the Rockies. Unfortunately, John Schneider announced today that he will undergo season-ending knee surgery as a result of a right ACL sprain, as shared by Foul Territory on Twitter. This is pretty much as bad of a result as possible for a guy who had just come over from the KBO. From here, I just want to wish him the best of luck in his recovery. I made a video yesterday about one of the weirdest triple plays you'll ever see on an MLB field, spring training or otherwise, one that was partially the result of a downright airheaded decision from base runner Matt Shaw, prompting the iconic announcer John Miller to say this.
And now the runner at third leaves the base, and he's going to be tagged out. It's a triple play to end the inning. Oh, wow. Matt Shaw made a boneheaded rookie mistake there.
But little did I know that there actually was yet to occur another moment in this contest that was even more notable from the perspective of what occurred in the booth. Only this time, it came from the mouth of a recent Hall of Famer. Jeff Kent, who in prior months was elected to Cooperstown courtesy of the Contemporary Baseball Era Committee, was on the broadcast in the bottom of the second inning, having a casual conversation with the normal crew. It was then that Miller brought up a collision that had come as a result of a slide from Alex Rodriguez many years earlier, prompting Jeff to say this.
Yeah, I did. He tore my knee up. He slid and rolled his fat ass past the base, the son of a bitch, and put me out for a little while. I was not happy about that because he was a middle infielder and we were beating him up pretty good.
So, not that you've thought about it much since then, but
that's half empty right there, John.
Now, I'm not sure if he just forgot he was on air or couldn't care less, but you just never hear that level of honesty on an MLB broadcast. It actually reminded me a bit of when Dan Dickerson, at the end of the ALDS last year, was caught on a hot mic using colorful language himself.
I don't have to do a game. Oh,
he's fuck. We get tired.
Fuck this game recap. Oh, I'm sorry. Was that out loud? 3, 2, 1.
The big difference, of course, here is that Jeff was fully aware he was on air, whereas Dan was not. Just as a bit of an update to those that aren't aware, this did not end up resulting in Dickerson getting kicked off the broadcast or anything. Probably because of the surrounding extenuating circumstances, a level of grace that I'm not sure will be extended to Kent from the Giants production team going forward. I did think personally his level of honesty here was hilarious, and certainly worth sharing with you guys, even if I did already cover a play from this game previously. You can check that out in the upcoming outro if it sounds interesting. I wrote, recorded, and even for a short time, released a video yesterday about Jose Soriano's historic start to the season for the Angels. Unfortunately, I ended up having to delete it for a couple of reasons. The first being an audio error, which created a loud clicking sound for some viewers towards the end. And then second, because he literally went out right after and proceeded to give up 3 runs to the White Sox in 5 innings, which greatly recontextualized his numbers. It is kind of funny that the following day I'm going to end up making a video about another ridiculous historic start. This one from Shohei Ohtani, who, through his first 5 starts of the season, has been more dominant than we've ever seen an MLB pitcher be, more so than even Jose before that start versus Chicago. In this video, I'm going to detail each of his appearances on the hill this season, and then go more into the record-setting nature of his feat after. We begin with his first start of the season versus Cleveland, when he kicked off his campaign by going 6 scoreless innings, with 6 strikeouts, 3 walks, and just 1 hit against. He probably could have gone even longer, as he exited with just 87 pitches having been thrown, but I'm sure LA wants to control his workload as he continues to ramp back up from his second Tommy John surgery a couple years ago. Start 2 came versus a considerably better opponent, at least in terms of lineup strength, in the Blue Jays, and they worked him more than the Guardians, tallying 4 hits and a walk against, and only striking out twice. Yet, he still managed to make his way through 6 innings, with only 1 run against, and that 1 was unearned, keeping his ERA on the season at exactly 0. Up next was, ironically, probably his best start of the season, even though it contained his first earned run, as he went in identical 6 frames, with just 2 hits against, 2 walks, and 10 strikeouts. He even broke out a new hesitation move versus Francisco Lindor, en route to punching out the switch hitter on a 100-mile-per-hour fastball, then concluded his day by striking out the side in order with 3 different pitch types. Complete and utter domination. Next, the Dodgers faced off with their historic rivals, the Giants, and they managed to touch Shohei up for the most hit against, though without managing to draw even a single walk, which, when paired with his 7 strikeouts, didn't lead to a run of any kind, earned or otherwise. This is a great time to bring up that in these first 4 appearances, he hadn't had to face more than 24 batters in any one start. a pretty ridiculous feat when you think about it. And lastly, the start that officially sealed the record we're going to discuss in a second came yesterday versus the Marlins, in what was easily his most tumultuous appearance, with him dealing 3 free passes, giving up a season-high tying 5 hits, and hitting a batter while committing a rare error in the field as well, leading to 2 runs scoring this time, with one of them being earned. He did manage to strike out 9, but it wouldn't end up coming in a winning effort, with him taking his first loss of the season when the Dodgers dropped this one 2-1. Still, he had managed to do something in the process that we had never seen from a hurler, regardless of 2A status by the way, as in his first 5 starts of the season, he had managed to go at least 6 innings while allowing no more than 5 hits or 1 run, with 0 homers against. This gives him, at this point, an MLB best ERA of 0.6, and his FIP isn't even that much higher at 1.96. The guy is literally on track to compete for a Cy Young, while maintaining an OPS currently around 900, which probably will rise significantly before year's end just based on his consistently good quality of contact. What a truly ridiculous and historic player. The Chicago White Sox improved massively last year relative to 2024, going from one of the worst teams of all time to simply well below average. This growth curve, along with a very interesting offseason, had a lot of Southside fans excited for what 2026 could bring. And while a 1-game sample size isn't enough to glean pretty much anything, I can say that their season opener couldn't have done much more to throw water on this emerging fire, because, you see, they not only struggled, they set multiple records for ineptitude to open the campaign. You certainly couldn't tell it was going to be this way, however, at the start, as Chase Meidroth, the first batter of the season, launched an absolute tank at 108 miles an hour, 417 feet to left center field, a degree of power I didn't even think he had, getting his team out to a 1-0 lead. This would, however, pretty much be the highlight of the afternoon. Starter Jacob Misiorowski would then immediately punch out the next 3 batters, and then 2 in the next frame. Meanwhile, Milwaukee would charge out to a 4-1 lead when William Contreras cleared the bases with 2 outs versus Shane Smith in the bottom of the second, a lead that, spoiler alert, would never be even remotely challenged again. But saying that doesn't quite capture the level of dominance they had to endure over the next 7 frames. Between the 3rd and 5th innings, they would strike out 6 more times, bringing Misiorowski's total on the day to 11 in just 5 innings, with that 1 run given up. In the meantime, the Brew Crew would double their run total to 8 when they got on the board with their first home run of the season, courtesy of Sal Frelick in the 5th. And the barrage just kept coming. 3 more runs in the 6th, and then the same in the 7th. And that was just on the pitching side. Hitting-wise, Chicago would see their lineup strike out 9 times over the game's final 4 frames, including 6 in the final 2. Though, mercifully, there was a slight glimmer of light when Munetaka Murakami launched his first career home run to right field. Part of what was, I would say, a pretty impressive debut. Bizarrely, even though coming into the season he has major strikeout concerns, he was one of only 2 hitters on the day for the Chi Sox that didn't punch out. When it was all said and done, they had lost 14-2, and done a couple things we had never seen before in the process, like Per J Kuda, become the first team in baseball history to strike out 20 times and lose by double digits, and then Per @J Hey Kid, the first team to have a game where the offense struck out 20+ times, caught 4 or fewer hits, and the pitching staff issued 10+ walks. Overall, do I think that this team is going to be worse than last year's squad that won 60 games? No, I don't. But there will certainly continue to be stinkers along the way, and this one just so happened to be one of the smelliest we've ever had the displeasure of observing. One of my favorite parts of being able to make baseball YouTube videos is highlighting the truly bizarre, those moments that might not be discussed very much at the end of the year, but which deserve acknowledgement for how downright weird they are when they happen. And it's with this being said, we saw something that very much fits this description a couple days back, in a Guardians-Royals game, on a double play so rare that we hadn't witnessed anything like it in Major League Baseball in over 30 years. Michael Wacha was facing the Guardians in a 1-1 game in the bottom of the 4th, hitting Kyle Manzardo with 1 out ahead of our highlighted play. I wanted to mention this too because it's a rare example itself of a time where a batter who was hit by a pitch was less hurt than the catcher that it ricocheted off of. Anyway, on the very next offering, Rhys Hoskins would rip a line drive towards third baseman Maikel Garcia, who saw it go off his mitt on a dive before perfectly ricocheting to Bobby Witt Jr., who then made an on-target toss to Jonathan India to start a 5-6-4-3 double play. That's right, literally everybody on the infield dirt had managed to touch this ball, and if that seems on its face pretty rare, it is. So much so, in fact, that Sarah Langs would later tweet out that this was the first one we had seen in MLB since 1995, when the Giants did so against the Montreal Expos. You gotta feel for Hoskins a bit, who could have had a base hit that put 2 guys on with 1 out, instead suffered one of the rarest double plays possible on a big league field. And this would prove to be pretty impactful for the game itself, as the Royals would go on to win this one by a final score of 4-2, with Kansas City registering 2 home runs in the process, including 1 from rookie Carter Jensen. Who knows? If Garcia, Witt, India, and Pasquantino don't make that play in the fourth, a substantial rally could have started. But instead, it'll simply go down as one of the weirder, if semi-underrated moments of the 2026 season when it finally concludes. And now, before we go, I wanted to do a mini shout out to Blue Jays manager John Schneider for putting up probably the most heated ejection I've seen so far this season, when he got booted from a game in the fifth after a balk was called on his pitcher. You can tell that the passion he was putting on display wasn't just a pushback against the umpire, but also served as an attempt to rally something out of his troops, who had lost 5 of their last 6 games at this point. Unfortunately for him, it wouldn't work, as eventually Edwin Diaz would go on to strike out the side in the 9th inning, closing down what was LA's second straight win over Toronto in their rematch of the 2025 World Series.
Stop me if you've heard this before, but the Mets are really going through it right now. After winning back-to-back games in borderline miraculous fashion, they then proceeded to get swept by the Colorado Rockies, a team that entered the series at 10-16, even if they are vastly improved from last year. In the entire 3-game series, they scored just 4 runs, including 1 in their doubleheader yesterday, dropping them to 10 games under 500, nearly 30 games into the season. This was enough for their longtime radio voice, Howie Rose, to outright imply that somebody needed to be fired in their subsequent off day, something you will almost never hear from a broadcast. After I take you through a recap of their twin bill, however, I think you'll understand a little bit better. They began their day with their star rookie on the hill, Nolan McLean, who punched out 2 batters in the top of the first, ahead of the Mets loading the bases with 1 out in the bottom half. All of this was taking place versus lefty Jose Quintana, who entered the game with an ERA over 6, so it really felt like a breakout was coming. But then Marcus Semien would strike out swinging, and Brett Beatty would be called out on strikes, leaving 3 runners on in downright heartbreaking fashion. Little did Mets fans know that this would be their last base runner until the top of the 5th. McLean certainly held up his end of the bargain, in the meantime only permitting 1 run, on a single from Troy Johnston in the 4th, a frame that definitely could have got away from him if it wasn't for his tenacity, which helped him escape with just that 1 run tallied, after he struck out Kyle Karros and got Brett Sullivan to hit into a double play. Perhaps for a moment this gave New York some momentum, as they would fight back in that 5th, with Tyrone Taylor launching a leadoff home run to left center field. However, the next 3 batters would go down in order, and quite easily might I add. This meant that when Huescar Brazoban got Troy Johnston to ground into a double play with the bases loaded, the Mets were now down by a run, despite McLean having thrown 5 innings with just 2 runs allowed, with only 1 of them being earned, and 7 strikeouts. The Rocks would tack on in the top of the 7th on an RBI single from Jake McCarthy, for a moment making it look like yet another anemic, basic Mets loss. But the guys in blue and orange weren't done teasing their fan base yet, because they would, yet again, manage to load the bases with just 1 out in the top of the 8th, with their 3, 4, 5 hitters coming up no less, and yet still come out of it with absolutely nothing when Luis Rivera Jr. popped out and Mark Vientos struck out. A 1-2-3 ninth against Victor Vodnik officially sealed their first loss of the day. And yet, I still think you could consider this performance to be vastly superior to what they would post in the next game, as at least they had some traffic in that one, and they did manage to score at least 1 run. Game 2 would not be so kind. Facing emerging breakout pitcher Chase Dollander, the Metropolitans would get 2 guys on with 2 outs in the bottom of the first, but once again, strand them without pushing anything across, which, much like the last game, would end up being their only major threat until the 5th inning. The big difference in this game was who was on the hill for New York, with Kodai Senga, who's been just brutal all season, running into some major trouble in the 2nd, giving up a run after he hit the first batter with a pitch and walked the next one, ahead of an eventual RBI single. And the 3rd would be even worse, giving up a leadoff knock and then a 2-run home run to right center field from Hunter Goodman. He wouldn't even manage to make it out of this frame when Brett Beatty made a throwing error, and then he walked Kyle Karros, ending his day with just 2 2/3 innings pitched, 3 earned runs, 3 walks, and a hit by pitch. Carl Edwards Jr. would come out of the bullpen and mercifully manage to retire Ezequiel Tovar, and then throw 3 subsequent scoreless innings with 5 strikeouts, saving the Mets some real potential problems in terms of bullpen usage. They could not, however, reward this effort with any kind of offense, as jumping all the way to that fateful bottom of the 6th, they put 2 guys on with nobody out, and then, despite Tyrone Taylor lining a ball at just 65 miles an hour to first base, Ronnie Mauricio, because he didn't freeze on the liner, got doubled off, completely draining the life right out of a potential rally. Bo Bichette would ground out shortly after. The rest of the way, the Mets would only manage to register 3 base runners in the last 4 innings, none of which came consecutively, eventually seeing Carson Bench fly out to Mickey Moniak in left field with a runner on second, ending what can only be described as one of the most nightmarish doubleheaders you can possibly have. This is perhaps what influenced Howie to say this post-game.
And you know, with an off day tomorrow, you just have to wonder if some kind of move is coming, because there's just nothing happening here right now for the New York Mets. They have been swept by the Rockies today and in the series.
Anyone who's in the baseball space knows exactly what he's saying here. There needs to be a change in management of some kind, probably with the firing of Carlos Mendoza, but potentially even with the letting go of their front office staff as well. A major shakeup should be on the way, and it'd be the perfect time to do it on an off day ahead of their series versus the Nationals, one that, perhaps with a little post-firing magic, they could look to win to get back on track. I'll be the first person to admit that the stat that I'm going to be discussing today that basically gives me an excuse to make this video is a little specific. But I want you to follow me, because this is not just about what Kevin McGonigle has managed to do in this highly specialized capacity, but also what it proves about his profile that makes him one of the most unique rookies we've seen in baseball's modern era, in the most positive manner possible. First though, let me present the stat, which I got from Chris McCoskey on Twitter. Kevin McGonigle is the 5th player in MLB history with 30 or more hits, 10 or more doubles, and less than 15 Ks in their first 25 games at the age of 21 or younger, and the first to do so in 90 years when Cleveland's Roy Weatherly and New York's Joe DiMaggio did so in 1936. Like I said, it does have a lot of qualifiers, but I want you to understand exactly what this implies. The dude is literally putting up the profile of one of the best hitters of the 1940s in DiMaggio, who was no slouch in that rookie season either, finishing 8th in MVP voting, with an OPS over 900. For Kevin to be able to have the kind of pop to smack that many doubles, yet the kind of batted ball profile additionally to only strike out 14 times in his first 25 games is truly unique, especially at that young of an age. And if you wanted to add another qualifier on there, you could throw in the fact he's also walked 14 times, the exact same amount as the strikeouts. And yet, somewhat bizarrely, per the advanced numbers, he's actually gotten relatively unlucky, with an expected slug 70 points above what his actual number is, as well as an expected WOBA 14 points higher. Now, I want to take it even a step further though, and compare him to the top 10 players in the league in whiff percent, which probably is the most relevant stat that connects to what McCoskey laid out in terms of avoiding strikeouts. No disrespect to the other players in this group, because we actually have some really solid hitters here, but just take a look at that. He's whiffing the 7th least in the entire sport, and yet he still has far above average totals relative to his peers around him in quality of contact, being ranked first in this group in adjusted exit velocity, EV 50, hard hit percent, barrel percent, by well over double by the way, launch angle sweet spot percent, expected WOBA, and actual WOBA, with his walk rate being 3rd behind Perdomo and Jacob Marcy, and his overall K percent being middle of the pack, despite all those incredible quality of contact metrics. And yet, somehow, it gets even better. The biggest knock on him so far this season, I think you could say, would be the fact that he hasn't really hit any home runs, with just 1 so far, coming out to a pace of about 6 in a full season. And yet, he's also exceptional at the #1 predictor of future dinger success, with a pulled air rate of 27.5%, which has him in the top 25 in the sport amongst those with at least 50 batted balls, despite it, again, being his first month and some change in the bigs. To put it simply, there's really nobody in the entire major leagues who's managing to avoid swing and miss and strikeouts, while pairing it with the kind of impact contact that McGonigle does. And I think the stat shared by Chris encapsulates this pretty well, and I absolutely cannot wait to see how the rest of this campaign plays out for the superstar in the making for my personal favorite team, the Tigers. Matt Chapman's biggest notoriety in 2026 came just here recently versus the Padres, when he cussed out his own teammate after he couldn't secure what was a fairly high throw to begin with. A lot of people didn't take too kindly to this, including myself, thinking it was a bit classless. But oh man, he's been getting punished by the baseball gods for it since. In the next series, he not only made this horrible looking error with the bases loaded versus the Mets, a play that directly cost his team 2 runs, but then another in the game yesterday, that admittedly his first baseman probably should have had, but still, if you're gonna hold your teammates to such high standards, you probably should be making that throw. But it wasn't this necessarily that I wanted to discuss, instead being what he did the very next inning. Something so stupid that the opposing announcer had to call it out for exactly what it was, and not just that one moment specifically. San Francisco was facing New York in the final game of a 4-game series, which they were losing 2-1, and things got off to a poor start in the top of the second, when, with nobody out and 2 guys on, Mark Vientos singled. But from here, starter Logan Webb would clamp down, not only working out of that jam without giving up another, but going on to throw 7 innings of 1-run baseball. In the meantime, his offense couldn't do much to support him, going scoreless themselves until the 6th. They finally did manage to break through on an RBI double from Chapman and single from Rafael Devers. They would ride this momentum until the top of the 8th, when, with 1 out, Luis Torrens came up, and after a stolen base from Luis Robert Jr., managed to flare a 3-2 down the line and right for a go-ahead knock. This was when we saw our first Matt miscue, as he made this diving stop down the third baseline versus the next batter, Mark Vientos.
then proceeded to hop up and bounce a throw on an in-between hop right past Devers. Now, that's a ball I'm sure a lot of first basemen are going to grab, but it at least couldn't have felt too good for Chapman, who certainly gave him one of the tougher pick opportunities you'll ever see. But this wasn't egregious. No, I think you could more so say that about what he did in the ninth, as after reaching on a single to lead off, he proceeded to try to steal second on a 1-1, getting thrown out in the process. I think this chart by Tango Tiger on Twitter does a great job of illustrating the abject stupidity of this play in numerical terms, and immediately following, take a listen as to what New York Mets announcer Gary Cohen had to say.
A terrible decision by Chapman as he gets gunned down for the first out of the ninth with his team down by 3 runs. Well, it caps off a horrible, no good, awful week for Matt Chapman. Just an inexplicable decision.
You don't hear opposing announcers talk in such embarrassing terms all that often, but I will say, based on how Chapman treated his teammate in San Diego, coupled with all of his other mistakes recently, it does seem warranted in this case. 2 batters later, the Mets had officially taken 3 out of 4 when Jung-Hoo Lee struck out on a fastball, dropping the Giants, in the process, to 3-7 on the young season. Julio Rodriguez has been one of the best outfielders in all of Major League Baseball since he made his debut back in 2022, as since that season he's been tied for 7th amongst outfielders in fielding run value at 31, while easily being the most valuable offensive player in the top 10 as well. This is in large part because of his nearly supernatural athleticism, which was on full display yesterday when he managed to corral what ended up being, essentially, a 108-mile-per-hour knuckleball to center field. Nick Kurtz was at the plate for the A's in a Monday night matchup versus Seattle, with the big lefty on an 0-1 leading off the game, lacing a 96-mile-per-hour fastball at 107.5 miles per hour off the bat towards Julio, who tracked it well before, at the very end, having to pull off a crazy, stopping, spinning, contorting catch to rob what would have been a certain double. At first glance, you might think that he just misplayed this ball, but that would not be an accurate read. Look at this replay. That shows the flight path from a higher angle. That ball was heading right towards him before, at the last second, forcing that crazy maneuver. So why exactly does a ball knuckle like that sometimes? Generally, it's because the hitter, in this case being Kurtz, got it off the end of the bat, essentially killing the spin while increasing the velocity. The thing that made this specific case an outlier was how much speed was actually able to be generated on a ball that was, by definition, not solidly hit, which I guess is props to Nick. What cat-like reflexes from Julio to still be able to grab that ball? And for a moment, it seemed like this established some good vibes for the overall ball game for Seattle, with Cal Raleigh crushing his 3rd home run of the season directly in front of a Rodriguez single and an RBI double from Josh Naylor. By the time the second was over, it was 3-0, courtesy of a Dom Canzone home run. And with one of the best young breakout pitchers so far of 2026 on the hill, Emerson Hancock, it seemed like this one had a decent chance of going Seattle's way. But the A's would not just go quietly, with Carlos Cortez launching a long ball of his own in the top of the 4th, and then Kurtz getting some redemption in the 6th with a 416-foot tank to center field, before Shea Langoliers crushed one 432 feet to tie the game at 3. And this is where it would stay going into the top of the 8th, when righty Casey Legumina completely fell apart for the M's, loading the bases with nobody out before allowing a sacrifice fly and 2-run single. The M's would mount somewhat of a comeback attempt following, getting 4 base runners between the 8th and 9th, but only come out of it with 1 run, eventually seeing Raleigh fly out to shallow right field to end it, helping the A's to move into first place in the AL West, while keeping the Mariners entrenched in 4th. The New York Yankees had an outstanding game yesterday overall, winning by a final score of 12-4, courtesy of some quality performances from players they really needed to receive them from, like Ryan McMahon, Jose Caballero, and the center of our video today, Jazz Chisholm Jr., who had a moment at the end of this one that was so embarrassing for him personally when it came to an ABS challenge. He said post-game that he would fine himself $1,000 as a consequence. I'm totally serious, by the way. The day did get off to a hot start for the second baseman, with him registering a 2-run single in the top of the 1st to put his team up 3-0, and get the Astros off to yet another bad start early. And unfortunately for them, on this day, they were facing Will Warren, a pitcher who's had a bit of a breakout so far in 2026, and they wouldn't be able to do much against him, scoring just 2 through 6 innings, while McMahon homered in the 2nd and Chisholm did the same in the 4th, a welcome sign of life from both players who struggled mightily to begin the year. For Jazz specifically, this was his 2nd homer in 2 games, with this one reaching almost 107 miles an hour, looking much like the tanks he was crushing throughout all of 2025. The production would not stop here though. He walked in the top of the 6th before eventually being brought around to score on a sacrifice fly from Trent Grisham, with his squad being up 8-2 by the time the frame concluded, putting things pretty firmly out of reach. A Ben Rice home run and 1 more RBI single for Jazz, this one again being crushed at over 105 miles an hour, officially put the Bronx Bombers into double digits, with a run-scoring double play and eventual home run from Caballero bringing their tally up to 12. This was when we'd see the moment I detailed in the intro, when Jazz, in the top of the ninth with a 3-2 count, got a fastball basically right down the middle, and yet decided to challenge it. I'm assuming just because they had a spare one late, but after seeing how outlandish the location was, he not only looked a bit surprised immediately after, but would go on to say post-game that he was fining himself $1,000, while letting it slip that he'd already been fined this amount earlier on in the year for issues relating to ABS. "I gotta do something for the team worth at least $1,000 after that," he quipped. And frankly, I'm not too surprised to hear that. Amongst all qualified hitters, he ranks dead last in net runs for as a product of challenges, as well as tied for 7th worst in overturns versus expected. It is cool that all this happened in the context of his most productive game of the year, so that way this video doesn't have to be overly negative, because I am a big fan of Jazz. I think he plays with a level of electricity that's not overly common. It's just that along with that comes some definite flaws as well. One of these, however, does not seem to be a lack of accountability in regards to his own ABS missteps. Before we go as well, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Boston Red Sox for giving up so many home runs to the Baltimore Orioles yesterday that they literally ran out of celebratory fireworks. That doesn't even seem like a real thing, but they indeed managed to accomplish it, with their record now sitting on the year at a stunning, staggering 9-17. When Javier Baez first emerged in the big league scene in the mid-2010s, he became a national star for some of the downright impossible things he seemed to be able to do on an MLB field, like endless swim moves, ridiculous, nearly impossible diving plays, lightning-quick tags, and hits that downright didn't make any sense. In the years after signing with Detroit, however, the magic of El Mago largely faded, only coming back for bits and spurts last year really, when he made an all-star team, in a season that still ended up seeing his OPS creep under 700. But even through his struggles, there still are flashes of his alien ability, and we got a front row seat to just that yesterday, when he pulled off nothing less than one of the best slides you will ever see on a major league field. He was at the plate in a then scoreless game with Zach McKinstry on first base, lining a ball down the right field line against Seth Lugo. This probably should have been second and third, but Tigers third base coach Joey Cora is very aggressive, and he decided to send McKinstry home, with him getting nailed after a subsequent challenge. In the process, Baez did move up to third though. This set him up for a matchup with one of the strongest arms in MLB right now, Jack Caglione in right, when Jake Rogers flew a ball 284 feet down the line. And at first glance, it looked like this was not going to go Javier's way, with the throw beating him handedly. But even as he slid in and was called out, the play wasn't over. A challenge was asked for by the Tigers, and after examining the replays, it became clear that in the middle of his process of sliding, he had managed to have the wherewithal to lift his hand out of the way of Salvador Perez's tag, and then drop it back down after he cleared the mitt. That is, quite simply, one of the best slides I've ever seen live, if not the very best. The kind of body control necessary to pull off something like that is downright extraterrestrial. And it would prove massive in this contest when the Royals came back to tie the score with 2 outs in the top of the 5th, sending Detroit into the later innings all knotted up instead of down by a run. This meant that when Wencel Perez launched a solo home run in the bottom of the 8th, it would be enough for a go-ahead shot, one that would eventually be the difference maker after Kenley Jansen closed things out with a runner on third. This helped the Motor City Kitties win their 5th game in a row, a streak they would extend the next game with a thrilling comeback victory in which they scored 3 runs with 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th after being 1 strike from the game ending, all following a large blown lead of their own earlier in the contest. What a massive turnaround from what was the worst start in baseball just about a week ago when they were 4-9. Instead, at this point, being 10-9. All I can say is that, as a Tigers fan, I am very happy at the moment. With the implementation of ABS in 2026, we've got a chance to see a number of notable moments early on that have pushed the boundaries of what's allowed and what's not. But something we hadn't seen until yesterday was a circumstance where a player actually never did issue a challenge, and yet, because an umpire somehow misperceived that he'd done so, he still was charged for one. Kobe Mayo was at the plate in the 2nd inning of a scoreless game, and on a 3-0 pitch, he got this fastball low and outside, which was called a strike, eliciting an animated reaction from the young infielder, which was interpreted by home plate umpire John Tom Payne as a signal he wanted to challenge, a process he then initiated. Kobe looked confused throughout the duration of this sequence of events, kind of standing around awkwardly, and then, as soon as it was confirmed, he got John's attention and said, "I never tapped," multiple times in a couple different ways, which Tom Payne seemed to outright deny as being true. But, as you can tell from this side-angle replay, while Mayo did go up with his hand, he didn't say anything, nor did he ever touch his helmet. That 100% should not have been a challenge per the rulebook. And yet, not only was it one, it was unsuccessful at that, causing the Orioles to lose one of their 2 ABS bullets. To Mayo's credit, he would manage to lock back in immediately after, lining the next pitch 111 miles an hour into the left field corner, directly ahead of being scored himself on a double from Sam Huff. This game would end up being a little bit crazy, with both teams trading runs throughout the middle innings before, eventually, getting all the way to the 10th, when Adrian Del Castillo of the D-backs gave his team the lead on a 420-foot tank to center field. Nolan Arenado would eventually tack on an RBI single of his own, giving his squad a bit of breathing room, which they wouldn't even end up needing, retiring the side in order in the bottom half without giving up a run, putting the finishing touches on a contest that featured one of the more bizarre ABS missteps we've seen so far, when an umpire outright cost a team a challenge because he thought a hitter was asking for one, when he most definitely was not.
This is going to be the third video I've made about Munetaka Murakami in the last week, because he keeps doing things that we've never seen before. And not in some kind of small arbitrary way either. I'm talking about major impact when it comes to power, on levels we've never seen from a player in his first year. And while yes, you can debate whether or not he should count as a rookie, considering he was playing at the highest level of Japanese baseball for over half a decade before coming to MLB, I still don't think this does much to diminish his historic accomplishments, another of which he registered yesterday versus the Nationals, when he not only hit an incredibly impressive home run from a physical perspective, but from a record-breaking one as well. Mooney began the night in one of the most predictable manners possible, striking out with the guy on third in the bottom of the first. This is one of 36 strikeouts he's already tallied, fully living up to that 3 true outcome mold we expected of him. But along with that certainly comes some massive power as well, which is what we would see in his very next at-bat, when in a 1-2 count, he got a changeup perfectly placed over the low and outside corner, a pitch that the vast majority of players are not even hitting hard. Murakami, though, has outlier power characteristics, and he's allowed him to crush this at 104 miles an hour, 415 feet to dead center field, despite being out in his front foot. That is a ridiculous accomplishment in and of itself, though perhaps not as impressive as the record it allowed him to set, with him being the first player in the history of Major League Baseball to register 11 homers before May as a rookie. Here's the crazy part though. The White Sox still have 5 games remaining on their schedule before the month is out, giving him ample time to push this mark even further. He would go on to get intentionally walked a couple innings later, which really shows a lot about how he's coming to be viewed, because it came versus a lefty after he'd managed to work a 2-0 count, and then use ABS to overturn a strike on a sweeper, something he's been downright elite at by the way, with his overturns versus expected easily being the best in Major League Baseball so far at 5.1, with his net runs for being tied for third. He would get one more at-bat before the day was out, crushing another hard-hit ball to center field at 108 miles an hour, though this one ended up being routinely hauled in by Jacob Young. With his help, the White Sox would end up emerging victorious by a final score of 5-4, getting the go-ahead run on a sacrifice fly from Sam Antonacci in the bottom of the 8th, then seeing Sir Anthony Dominguez work around some serious trouble in the 9th, striking out the powerful James Wood with a runner on third to end it. Even if the White Sox end up losing 90-plus games this year, they might be the most entertaining 90-loss squad we've seen in some time, and it's in no small part because of the exploits of Murakami. There are a few things in Major League Baseball that hurt worse than a blown lead, especially when it's in the late innings of a contest you feel your team should have had a good chance of winning. There's all different kinds of forms a blow-up can take: a walk with the bases loaded, a game-breaking home run, a seeing-eye single in the right spot. I'm, however, going to put forward that I think the single most painful variation possible is a fundamentals breakdown, and we just saw that yesterday in a major way in a contest between the Guardians and Cardinals, when, with 2 outs, Cleveland completely fell apart. The game got off to a pretty fast start early, with Jose Ramirez slugging his 3rd home run of the year in the top of the 1st, a shot that left his bat at 108 miles an hour and traveled nearly 400 feet. This was a good sign for Jose, who's been struggling a little bit, at least by his standards, to open the campaign. Ivan Herrera, though, wouldn't wait long to strike back, launching his first home run of the year on an actually well-placed changeup, sending it 401 feet to left field. Then, in the top of the 2nd, Daniel Schneemann would crush what would end up being our longest ball of the day, a 424-foot nuke to center field. But while that one may have been the longest, it certainly would not be the last, with J.J. Weatherholt in the bottom of the 3rd getting on the board with his 2nd career home run, tying the game up at 2. And then, despite some traffic from both sides, this is where it would stay going into the top of the 8th, with, most notably, a run being outright taken off the board when Stephen Kwan robbed Alec Burleson, with a diving catch in center field in the 6th, resulting in a double play after he managed to throw back behind Weatherholt. In that 8th, Cleveland would finally manage to break through, this time on a ground ball that just snuck past the outstretched glove of 3rd baseman Ramon Urias, allowing George Valera to register an RBI double. Angel Martinez would do the same just 2 pitches later, on a laser down the right field line, scoring 2 more, pushing Cleveland's lead to 5-2. This is when I'm pretty sure most watchers of this game became convinced this was curtains, as Cleveland's big superpower in recent years has been their excellent bullpen. But
On this night, that would not be the case, with Eric Sabrowski, who was on to try to get things to the ninth, proceeded to give up a 2-run home run 3 batters into his appearance, again to Weatherholt, with that swing being an excellent example of why many in the industry believe that JJ can be a superstar. Being able to hit that pitch in that spot to that location on the field is just ridiculously impressive. Still, the Guardians maintained their lead going into the bottom of the ninth, and after Nolan Gorman flew out to center field, they had Cade Smith, one of the best relievers in the entire game, being just 1 out away from victory. That was when Mason Wynn, a hitter with just a career 91 OPS plus, came to the plate and knocked a routine ground ball to second, but second baseman Juan Brito, who had just come in the game to pinch run, played it horribly, allowing it to bounce off himself and into right field instead of getting in front of it, extending the game for at least another hitter. Smith was still out there, however, so the chances for any kind of comeback remained low. The chances, however, would go up on the first pitch to Yoel Pozo, a breaking ball to the backstop which allowed Wynn to move in a scoring position, and then, quite horrifyingly for Guardians fans, Pozo would make them pay dearly, lining a ball at 105 miles an hour into the right center field gap, tying the game up at 5. The bleeding would stop here as Cade would strike out Thomas Saggese to send it to extras, but the damage was done. Cleveland had to strike back to get that horrible taste out of their mouth, to try to get the momentum back on their side. Unfortunately for them, though, that's not what would happen. A flyout, strikeout, and groundout would mean that they were going to the bottom of the 10th in a still-tied game. This was when even more pain would set in, as with the first batter in that frame, Nathan Church, attempting to give himself up on a bunt, Tim Herron would sling a curveball to the backstop, doing the job of moving the base runner up for him without even having to sacrifice an out. Church would then lock in to do exactly what he needed to, launching a fly ball to right field that was just deep enough to allow base runner Saggese to score, sealing a thrilling comeback win for the Cardinals, and one of the most painful losses you will ever see on a major league field for the Guardians, who managed to snatch a defeat from the jaws of victory, with some of the worst fundamental baseball you can possibly play in those situations. Yordon Alvarez lost a home run yesterday in a very interesting way, with a ball that was pretty easily going to be a homer hitting off the closed roof in right field, resulting in it being called a foul ball, a judgment that would stand after review. But while this was certainly weird, it wasn't in any way record-setting. But you couldn't say the same for the subject of this video, as this Ian Happ fly ball got knocked down by an amount that we had never seen before, over 110 feet by the Wrigley wind. Coming into the ninth inning of what was a relative blowout at that time, we had seen 3 home runs, all of them off the bat of Nationals. The first one was from Joey Wiemer in the first inning, crushed out at nearly 111 miles an hour and at a 31-degree launch angle, yet only traveling 391 feet. For a little reference, home runs with these specs often travel upwards of 450. Then there were Jacob Young and Brady House's shots, but they each went to right field, slicing through the wind instead of having to fight against it. This hopefully gives some context to the conditions Happ was facing when he came up in the bottom of the ninth inning with 1 out and got a 2-1 fastball in the inner half of the plate, barreling it up at 108.5 miles an hour at a 32-degree launch angle, only to see it travel a measly 320 feet. It didn't even manage to reach the warning track. You could see in the look on Happ's face he understood that something was up, and you could say the same of James Wood, who was the outfielder who made the catch. But it wouldn't be until after the game, when Mike Petrelio on Twitter posted this video, that we would get a sense of just how ridiculous what happened actually was. Because, you see, per weather applied, this ball had been knocked down by 113 feet of distance, as under normal conditions, it would have not only cleared the fence, but been on Waveland Avenue. This is the harshest a ball has ever been affected per their measurements. This was further evidenced by something Carson Wolf made a separate tweet about. As he said, since 2024, there have been 27 batted balls hit between 108 and 109 miles an hour at a 32-degree launch angle. 25 of those 27 went for a home run, and they averaged 419 feet. Yesterday, Ian Happ's ball was hit at 108.5 and at a 32, but it only went 320 feet. This was truly bizarre, and only a small part of what was a pretty frustrating day for Cubs fans, as they had to endure not only those crazy weather conditions, but their team losing to one of the worst squads in the entire major leagues, and decidedly so. In some ways, there's nothing more special for a position player than their first career home run. Sure, a first hit is more achievable, and for some guys, because of their specific mold, that dinger can be awful elusive. Still, nothing can quite compare to that first journey around the bases during the most productive play possible in baseball. But that isn't to say that all first long balls are built the same, and we just saw one a couple days back that might be amongst the most bizarre I've ever seen on an MLB field, when Sam Antonacci put up his initial quote-unquote blast on a 57-foot ground ball that went off the ball boy. The lefty was at the plate in an 8-2 ball game in the top of the ninth, facing side armor Ryan Thompson, and on a 1-1, he got a sinker middle low that he slapped down the left field line. As it was headed towards the corner, the ball boy down there apparently didn't understand that it was a live ball, which influenced him to attempt to play it, seeing it tip off the end of his mitt. Understandably, Lourdes Guerrero Jr., the left fielder, thought that immediately this would make it a dead ball, but no call from the field umps came, forcing him to, at the last second, pick it up and make a hurried relay throw in. That, while perfect, ended up being just a bit late, with Antonacci racing around the bases with an inside-the-park home run. You could definitely tell post-play that there were some shocked reactions, and it makes sense when you examine the replay. That ball 100% was interfered with by the definition of the rule, even if the resulting contact was not especially notable, but because there was no initial call of interference, it, by a weird quirk of the MLB rulebook, was not challengeable by Arizona. This meant that the first career home run for Antonacci, who is a pretty decent prospect for the Sox, came on a 57-foot ground ball, already in the running for the shortest you'll ever see. But with that accompanying caveat of its missed interference, the odd factor, obviously, was ratcheted up to 11. Something I also have to point out here is the hustle of Sam. It would have been so easy to just shut that down at second base after he saw that the ball had been touched, or even at third. But to keep running like that all the way, as you can see in this replay, is certainly respectable, and shows the kind of grit that he plays the game with at every point possible, which is something we already saw during his performance in the WBC. Check out this slick deke that he made that I never really got a chance to detail back during the tournament. The dude is a straight-up ball player. This, of course, would not end up making all that big of a difference in the game, as the score was already well out of reach when this play occurred, and the White Sox would indeed go on to win this one by a final score of 11-5. This has been part of an exceptionally fun series already, which saw in Game 2 them lose by a final score of 11-7, though with some real history being registered, as Coulson Montgomery and Munetaka Murakami became the first teammates ever to homer in 4 straight contests, with Mooney's streak reaching 5 personally when he went deep on a 451-foot blast to dead center, which tied the all-time rookie record with 13 other players. Regardless of how things finish out for the White Sox this season, they will at least be a very fun team to monitor going forward. From 2023 to 2025, Miles Michaelis served a very specific purpose in the St. Louis rotation. Take the ball every 5th day, go out there, and put up innings, regardless of the results that would follow. This led to him being one of only 19 pitchers over this time frame with at least 500 innings pitched, certainly an accomplishment. However, out of those guys, he allowed the most earned runs, with 293, with only Patrick Corbin really even being in the same league, another guy with a similar skill set, being essentially a durable punching bag. And that's the role he's going to serve with the Nationals this season. And he just put up an outing that is perhaps the most perfect encapsulation of this archetype, one so much so in fact, that it had never happened before in an MLB field. You could tell from the setup that this probably wasn't going to be pretty, considering the Dodgers were in town, bringing with them a top 3 offense in MLB over the last half-decade. And yet, early on, it was his own squad that teed off on LA starter Emmett Sheehan, with CJ Abrams crushing a 3-run home run in the bottom of the first with 2 outs. And Miles made this stand up over the next 2 innings, not permitting even a single base runner in this time. But all of that would change in the third, when he allowed 2 guys to get on ahead of the best player in the National League coming up, Shohei Ohtani, who then crushed his first home run of the year on a hanging changeup, tying the game with one mighty swing. And this would open the floodgates, as Mookie Betts would follow an ensuing Kyle Tucker single with a long ball of his own, giving his squad their first lead of the day. But, as you could probably guess from the title of this video, the punishment was not even close to being done, as after Abrams registered his 4th RBI in the bottom of that very frame, LA would tack on 2 in the 4th on yet another long ball from Andy Pages. Now, if this was another pitcher, that probably would have been close to the end of the day for him. After all, 7 earned runs is a lot. But again, that's not his role. He's in there to take punishment, and he would do so once again in the top of the 5th, surrendering yet another dinger to Freddie Freeman and an RBI double to Teoscar Hernandez. It was at this point the plug was pulled, with the ready departing for Gus Varland, who surrendered an RBI knock to Kyle Tucker before mercifully retiring Mookie Betts on a lineout. This crystallized a final line of 4 1/3 innings pitched with 11 runs given up, 1 walk, 4 Ks, and 4 homers surrendered. This not only was notable for how ridiculous it looked, but also for being literally unlike any we had ever seen before, as per Pitcher Gami on Twitter, an account that tracks unique pitching lines. You have to respect how much abuse he's willing to go out there and take, especially for a team in the Nationals who really need it at this point. Both clubs kind of sleptwalked through the rest of this one, with each registering 2 additional tallies, the only real notable of which came from Kyle Tucker's first home run as a Los Angeles Dodger. When this one finally concluded, the Dodgers had emerged victorious by a final score of 13-6, helping them to get off to an impressive start on the year, while dropping the Nationals to 3-4. Just a heads up, everybody, if I sound a little off right now, it's because I am sick. Jacob Misiorowski might be the most exciting pitcher we've seen in years to have an ERA over 4 in his career through his first 100 or so innings, as he is still must-see TV every time he's out there, and it's in large part because of his obscenely impressive stuff, which has yielded 138 strikeouts through just those 98 frames, which of course has been offset by 44 walks and 8 hit by pitches, but still, it is a fiasco whenever he's on the hill. and he just did something so impressive yesterday that it downright overshadowed him striking out 9 batters over 6 innings versus a much improved Pittsburgh offense, when he broke the all-time record for fastball velocity for a starter, twice in the same at-bat. And we as baseball fans wouldn't have to wait long to see it. The first batter of his night, Oneil Cruz, was the recipient of all 3 of his hardest pitches on the day, with his first heater coming in at 102.6, which went right past the big lefty, tying the all-time mark set by Tarek Skubal last year. Just a little side note, but it's still nuts to think that this was his last pitch of the day in the 9th inning of a shutout. But anyway, back to the Miz. He got back on the rubber and then proceeded to fire an 0-1 marginally faster, officially breaking the record at 102.7. This is a great time to bring up that for anyone that wants to say he threw harder than this in the last postseason, he was officially coming out of the bullpen then, which is why it didn't count. Anyway, the fireworks weren't over, because on the 1-2, he would manage to not only repeat that same speed of 102.7, but to do so on a swinging strikeout of Cruz, officially setting the all-time mark for the fastest pitch ever on a strikeout by a starter as well, which was pointed out on Twitter by one of my favorite follows, Sarah Langs. He then managed to eclipse 102 twice more to the following batter, Brandon Lowe, who'd end up punching out on a high-octane heater as well. After a walk, he would finish off the first with another strikeout of Ryan O'Hearn on, you guessed it, another blazing fastball at 101 miles an hour. This would end up being his best frame of the day in terms of pure dominance, as he would go on to give up 3 runs over the next 5 frames, with the most notable hits against him coming off the bats of Spencer Horwitz and Connor Griffin, who notched RBI singles in the top of the 4th, and then Horwitz again when he managed to lift a sacrifice fly just deep enough to left field in the 6th. On the flip side, his team managed to do just enough as well to tie things up, with productive outs in the 4th from Garrett Mitchell and Sal Frelick, leading to 2 runs of their own, and then again in the bottom of the 6th, basically mirroring Pittsburgh with another sacrifice fly from Frelick. Alas, the story of this game would not end happily for the Brewers, who went on to give up 3 runs in the top of the 10th on RBI singles from Brian Reynolds and Nick Gonzalez, ahead of a 1-2-3 turn for them at bat, dropping them officially back to 500, as well as improving the Pirates' record to 16-11, a better start than I'm sure most would have expected coming into the season. It's no surprise that most announcers are somewhat biased towards their home team, right? They know the players personally and see what they go through every day, so it's a near guarantee they're going to take their side if there's any kind of conflict. But we got a chance to see yesterday something far more rare. A team's own home broadcast basically refused to back the players up on the field because they disagreed with the arguments they were making against the umpiring crew. The Marlins were in a 6-4 game entering the bottom of the 9th, in a game that has been like many Miami has engaged in this season, an absolute dogfight, with the Phillies jumping out to a 6-1 lead on the strength of RBI hits from Alec Boehm and Justin Crawford in the top of the 4th, then a run-scoring single from Edmundo Sosa and a 3-run home run from Bryson Stott in the 7th, before the Fish responded with 3 in the 8th, courtesy of productive at-bats from Otto Lopez, Liam Hicks, and Agustin Ramirez. This meant they had a fighter's chance going into the bottom of the last frame, and things began well for them, with Javier Sanoja drawing a 4-pitch walk to lead off. This takes us to our first moment of notoriety from the broadcast, when, in a 3-2 count, he checked his swing.
Yeah, I think he went. I understood from Bruce Dreckman's perspective where he was coming from there on that check swing.
If this was the extent of things, this wouldn't even be a video worth making. But we weren't done here. The very next hitter, Kyle Stowers, would work a tough at-bat of his own, seeing another 6 pitches before, on the 7th, taking a 98-mile-per-hour fastball right over the low and outside corner. This frustrated the lefty enough that he let out a deeply emotional display, resulting in him getting booted shortly after, with manager Clayton McCullough not being far behind him. This is when the Marlins booth definitively took a side in the conflict, saying this in no uncertain terms.
I'll be very honest with you, Hut. I would love to come to the defense of the Marlins here, but I did not have a problem with the check swing called 3rd strike on Marcy, and I certainly don't have a problem with that strike 3 call on Stowers.
I like when announcers have the gonads to stand up for what they personally believe, as well as what they know fans want to hear, and this was a prime example of that to me. Both calls, unfortunately for the Marlins, would end up being hugely impactful, as instead of having at least 2 runners on with 1 out if one of them went their way, it was 2 outs with a runner on first. Otto Lopez would end up extending the game a little further with an RBI single after Sanoja went to second on defensive indifference, then managed to advance to second on a wild pitch, before ultimately being stranded after Xavier Edwards flew out to center field. This dropped Miami to 2 games under the 500 mark, while simultaneously allowing the Phillies to now have a 4-0 record since Don Mattingly was named as manager, in place of the fired Rob Thompson. The Houston Astros are not having a good time right now, having lost 7 straight games en route to somehow being last in their division, when just a few days ago the Mariners were 4-9. This has largely come as a product of some of the worst pitching we have ever seen, as they've already given up a Major League worst 101 runs, with no other team even being at 90 at this point. But when it rains, it pours, and so it kind of makes sense that they would also be the victim of our first truly great deke of the season, which came yesterday in their contest versus Seattle, and only after some preceding misfortune as well. Jose Altuve was on first base after registering a leadoff single, and on a 3-2 to Yordon Alvarez, he took off for second, making it easily after the hulking lefty struck out and Cal Raleigh's throw sailed into center field. This set Houston up well to strike first and break out of their funk, or at least that's what would have happened had Cal's hand not run into the umpire's mask, eliciting the rare umpire's interference call that sent Jose all the way back to first base, through no fault of Houston's. It was there that, on a 1-1, he got his leadoff, and then, all of a sudden, was just caught standing there, looking completely flat-footed. So, what happened? Well, the M's pulled off one of the best dekes using a timing play possible, with Josh Naylor faking as if a throw was coming well before one did, getting Altuve bouncing back to the bag and then forward, right before Raleigh put his mitt down to indicate a pickoff move, which righty Logan Gilbert executed to perfection. It was almost like a dance. Naylor's move back to get Jose's feet moving, then returned to a semi-nonchalant stance right as the hurler threw over. This is just baseball poetry in motion right there, and it perhaps gave Seattle some momentum going into the bottom half, as they would end up scoring on an RBI single from Randy Rosarena, then getting 1 in the second on a bases-loaded walk, and 2 in the third on another free pass and sacrifice fly. Houston at the plate would only register a single run on a Yainer Diaz homer, which was shortly after followed by a 2-run double from Luke Wrigley to salt the game away. When it was all said and done, Houston had registered their 7th straight loss, while in the process, seeing their pitching staff give up another 19 base runners, courtesy of 8 hits, 9 walks, and 2 hit by pitches. If they can't find some way to start getting quality outings from their staff, it could very easily end up being another long, playoff-less season in Texas. And now, before we go as well, I wanted to give a shout out to Jose Soriano for becoming the first pitcher since at least 1900 per Sarah Langs on Twitter to record 25 plus innings in his first 4 appearances of a season, while allowing fewer than 10 hits and 1 or 0 runs. The Angels have not had a true ace at the top of the rotation since arguably Jared Weaver, and as such, it's cool to see the emergence of a guy who definitely does have some of the best raw stuff in the game. It'll be interesting to track now if he can maintain something even close to this performance over the course of the full season, because if he does, he could be a dark horse Cy Young contender.
The New York Mets, going into their game yesterday, were coming off a stretch where they had lost 15 of 17 games, including, at one point, 12 in a row. Most of this, however, did come without the help of Juan Soto, who was out for a decent portion of the early part of the season with a lower body injury. Thankfully for them, he is back, and yesterday even managed to crush a home run. That, however, is not what I wanted to discuss principally in this video, instead being an at-bat in the 7th inning, when he literally, verbally, asked the opposing catcher if he should swing or not. Twice in a row. His team got out to the fastest start possible, which is probably exactly what they needed coming off a sweep to the Rockies, with Bo Bichette launching an opposite field home run to right center to lead off the bottom of the first. That was just the 2nd home run of the year so far for Bichette, who really needs to get going. A few batters later, we would see catcher Drew Millis make one of the better plays you'll see from a backstop all season, racing over, then athletically sliding near the dugout to secure a pop-up off the bat of MJ Melendez. From here, for a bit, it seemed like another typical Mets game, meaning that there was zero offensive momentum outside of the occasional long ball, with them putting up just 1 additional base runner the 2 frames after the first. But it was in the bottom of the 4th that they would rally, and this time, in a real way, loading the bases with 1 out for Marcus Semien. And while he wouldn't register a hit, he would put the ball in play, topping a crazy spinner down the 3rd base line that ended up sneaking under the glove of Jorbit Vivas, scoring 2 runs while keeping runners on 2nd and 3rd. This officially opened the floodgates, with Carson Benj, who's been red hot recently, lining a single to center field to score 2 more, and then later on in the frame, Bo registering his 2nd RBI on a sacrifice fly to right field. This brought up Soto with 2 outs and a runner on first, and he didn't miss his chance to join the party, lacing a 2-2 fastball at 105 miles an hour to left center field, doubling his own home run total from 1 to 2. This made it a 7-run inning, putting things pretty firmly out of reach for a National squad that, besides some quality contributors at the top, doesn't have a ton of depth in that lineup. This would be all New York would score on the day, by the way, so I don't think their offensive struggles are necessarily gone at this point, especially versus a Washington bullpen that's easily one of the worst in the sport. But needless to say, the vibes were indeed up entering the bottom of the 7th, when Soto registered the notable moment I briefly detailed in the intro, working a 3-0 count before turning to Millis and saying this.
Yeah, you heard right. He literally asked him if he should swing, which I'm guessing was either ignored or answered affirmatively based on his body language right after. This was already a little out of the ordinary, but then, on the 3-1, he did it again.
I feel like he's mic'd up the entire time.
It sounds like it right now.
The pitch following this time was a little more notable because he received a breaking ball at the top of the zone, the perfect pitch to lace hard somewhere, but he again was taking all the way post-inquiry. The at-bat would then conclude with him flying out routinely to left field on a fastball right down the middle, so at least he did get a good pitch to hit after all. I'm totally fine with Soto having fun out there, as baseball is a game after all. Though I will say, as a Mets fan, when your team is struggling this bad, it might feel a bit tone-deaf to be bantering with the opposing catcher on your swing decisions. But hey, I guess all's well that ends well. Because New York would indeed manage to close this one out, and in dominating fashion may I add, with Craig Kimbrell turning back the clock to strike out the side, in order on 3 heaters, each being faster than the last. Hopefully this gives New York something to build on going forward, as even though I personally don't have a stake in their success, I like seeing teams that invest in their roster do well, and that has certainly not been the case so far in 2026. Something that's become a bit of a relic of the olden days in Major League Baseball is the tough slide at second base. Most players now just try to get out of the way of the throw so they don't risk any kind of injury, both for their opponent, but most especially for themselves. But once in a while, we'll still see something a bit aggressive, and that's exactly what many on the internet thought that happened in a game yesterday between the Pirates and Rays, when Chandler Simpson seemingly went out of his way to slide into the legs of Connor Griffin. That's why I wanted to make this video, to discuss whether or not that actually happened, or if this was perhaps blown a bit out of proportion. Tampa got down early 4-0 on 2-run home runs from Ryan O'Hearn and Marcell Ozuna, before fighting back with 5 runs of their own in the top of the 5th, highlighted by doubles from Junior Caminero and Johnny DeLuca. Pittsburgh pushed things to extras after Nick York tied the game with 2 outs in the bottom of the 8th. Once we got to bonus frames, it was back and forth, with no one scoring in the 10th, then the Rays taking the lead after Taylor Walls scored from first base on a pickoff throw. Yeah, you heard me correct. On a pickoff throw from first. Griffin, though, would then almost immediately tie things up after this, on a ground ball to second base that York just barely managed to beat out at the plate. This brings us to our highlighted play, when, in the top of the 13th, after Cedric Mullins hit a go-ahead 2-run home run to right center field, Tampa would load the bases with 1 out, bringing Caminero back to the dish, who bounced an 0-1 to second base, where it was flipped to second and then thrown late to first, giving his squad a 3-run lead. Or, at least, that's what would have happened had the umpires on the field not called interference on Chandler at second base, who it looked like had slid directly into Griffin as he was throwing. Afterwards, Kevin Cash argued with the crew for a fairly substantial amount of time, and on the surface, this might look bad. Why would he be trying to defend this type of behavior? Well, as you can see from this alternate angle, what he was saying, which I think there's some real logic behind, is that Griffin got this ball and then directly changed course to collide with Simpson. I'm not sure if this was intentional from Connor to try to draw a call since he knew he wasn't going to get Caminero at first, or if it was just a little lapse in fundamentals, but you can see it's pretty obvious Simpson was sliding to avoid Connor, not intentionally hurt him, making this a pretty bad call. I'm sure Rays fans would have been much more incensed at that had they not managed to hold on for a victory, as even though Griffin registered an RBI single with 2 outs, the Pirates couldn't get any more than this, falling when Joe Bart struck out with the winning run on second base, helping Tampa to maintain their current standing of first in the American League East. It was believed for a long time that you really couldn't throw a knuckleball beyond a certain velocity threshold because of the literal goal of the pitch, which is to achieve as little spin as possible, which seems to run counter to higher speeds that generally have higher spin rates. The player who really changed this perception is the guy who held the velocity record for a number of seasons, R.A. Dickey, who at the height of his powers was known to throw his butterfly pitch routinely in excess of 80 miles an hour, with the official mark being set by him during his last season in 2017, when he hit 83.2 miles an hour. Since then, this was broken by our only current knuckleballer, Matt Waldron, who managed to push it all the way up to 84.9 on a strikeout to Nick Castellanos. But yesterday, in his return from what we'll call an interesting injury, he not only managed to surpass this record, but to do so 3 separate times. Matt was on the mound versus the Angels opposite Jose Soriano, who, worry not, I'll mention before this video is over, retiring the first 2 batters he faced, Zach Neto and Mike Trout, on a flyout and ground out. This brought Nolan Shanwell to the plate, who, on a 2-2, lined this ball into center field for a base hit. But it was on this very offering that Waldron had also managed to accomplish the historic feat that I mentioned in the intro, with the velo reaching 85.8 miles an hour, almost a full mile an hour up from his previous record. This came just ahead of him getting an inning-ending pop-out from Joe Adell. The second was much more tumultuous for the righty, who would end up giving up 3 runs before the frame concluded, with the most notable swing coming from Yoan Moncada, who blasted a home run. Though at least he managed to end things with a flare, punching out the red-hot Mike Trout on a 93-mile-an-hour fastball. This takes us to our second real notable matchup, when with 2 outs in the third and runners on first and second, he faced off against Josh Lowe, getting him behind 0-2 before fouling off an 85.2-mile-per-hour knuckler, another pitch that would have broken that previous velocity record. What would he come back with on the next offering? How about another knuckleball, this one at 85.1, which induced one of those weak, awkward swings you can only get on a pitch that's truly nasty. He would end up retiring just 2 more batters in the fourth before giving way to David Morgan. By the time that inning concluded, a few more runs had crossed the plate, leaving his final line of the day at 3 2/3 innings pitched with 6 runs allowed. But at least with that aforementioned accompanying record. On the flip side, Jose Soriano was locked down once again, with his 5 2/3 innings of scoreless baseball helping him to do something that we hadn't seen since 1985. A pitcher allow 1 or fewer runs through their first 5 starts of the season. Shout out to Just Baseball for pointing this out on Twitter. This has his ERA as of now at 0.28. Oh, and he also managed to punch out 8 batters versus a team that was red hot coming into this one. What an impressive start for a pitcher who is quickly becoming one of the premier arms to watch in the entire major leagues. All this would end up resulting in the Angels coming away with an 8-0 victory, helping them to rise to 11-10 on the year, currently second place in the American League West.
The Boston Red Sox have been an absolute mess to start the 2026 season, as even after their blowout win yesterday, which saw them hang 17 on the Orioles, they still have a negative run differential, as well as a 10-17 record, being at this point 8 games back already of their rival Yankees. And it's not like they've really gotten unlucky either. At the plate, they're last in total home runs at 18, third worst in team slugging percentage and OPS, and fourth worst in OPS+, and they're well below average in most pitching stats as well. All of this is probably why there was such a major shakeup yesterday, when they not only fired their manager, Alex Cora, but a host of other people in his camp. And then, as a direct response to all of this going down, Cora himself said publicly that he was, quote, happy about the whole thing. And we can see at least part of the reason why in how the team decided to relay all of this to their players. Like I said, Alex, hitting coach Pete Fatsi, third base coach Kyle Hudson, bench coach Ramon Vasquez, assistant hitting coach Dylan Lawson, and major league hitting strategy coach Joe Cronin were all let go yesterday, following the trouncing in Baltimore, which I'm guessing had little to nothing to do with the decision overall. Shout out by the way to Codify on Twitter, who recapped all of this in one nice tweet. Usually when that kind of sweeping change is made nearly instantaneously, there's some kind of tension going on in the background, and this was essentially confirmed when Cora went onto his Instagram and made a series of cryptic posts to his story, including one with all the coaches looking more than a bit jovial, including Jason Varitek, who was offered to be reassigned but declined to do so, giving a thumbs down sign. And then shortly after, the reposting of a video taking aim at the Red Sox trading Mookie Betts. What was already a pretty juicy story got even more so when, at 1:12 a.m. my time, being Pacific, he made this single-line tweet saying, quote, happy, with a smiling emoji. You just never see somebody who's been fired from a major league job be this open about their excitement to no longer be associated with an organization, but a couple of pictures and quotes that came out after perhaps gave some insight as to why he might be. First of all, and what will go down as one of the most memeable images ever in the baseball space, Chris Cotillo shared that the bus that took the coaches away was literally run by something called Coaches for Hire LLC, being a bit insensitive at best and downright smug at worst. But what's perhaps even more darkly ironic is that it's possible some of the players on the team learned about this firing via this very image being shared, as Cotillo again went on to post that there are multiple players who found out about Cora's booting via social media like the rest of the world. And then additionally, as reported by Tim Healy, players were, quote, not invited to ask the bosses questions about the firings, with pitcher Garrett Whitlock going as far as to say that, quote, they made it very clear we get paid to play baseball, and we just need to focus on playing baseball. There seems to be an insane level of disconnect between this front office, run by Craig Breslow, and the players themselves, which perhaps influenced another viral tweet I had to share here from Rob Bradford, who said that a former Red Sox player texted him that the situation was like crapping your pants and changing your shirt. That's an old-timer right there, and I think that I agree. Let me first say, I am no big fan of Alex Cora. There's the sign-stealing stuff, and I also think he hasn't done the best job adapting to modern managerial strategies. So I don't think it was wrong to necessarily fire him, but to do it, like they did, and then not have the front office go with him, when they are every bit as complicit as him in these struggles, if not more so, is just lunacy, and could lead to some dark times in Boston if they can't find a way to right what seems to be a somewhat leaky ship at this point.
Alright everybody, if you made it this far, I appreciate you watching, and if you did, consider checking out any of these other videos on your screen right now for other content just like this. Also, if you ever see anything you'd like to see me detail in the video, feel free to reach out to my email, basebpoet@gmail.com, and if I end up using your idea, I'll give you a shout out. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day. The main purpose of the implementation of ABS into MLB is to remove the worst calls from the game, right? And so far, I think it's been a resounding success. The biggest moments are, as of now, relatively unclouded from the human error of umpires, and it's been especially satisfying to see a couple guys that perhaps have heads that are a bit big get humbled. But what if I were to tell you that we just saw the worst call of the season so far, and it not only wasn't challenged, it actually couldn't be? You'd probably be confused, so let me break it down. Brett Sullivan was at the plate with Tyler Heineman on the mound in what had become an outright blowout, with the Rockies somewhat bizarrely having gone up 14-4 on the defending AL champion Blue Jays, courtesy in part of a 7-run 6th inning, and Heineman having surrendered 5 runs of his own in the 8th and 9th. The at-bat would begin with Brett crushing a ball down the right field line, then proceeding to take 3 straight balls. This was when we would see our highlighted offering, as on the 3-1, Tyler floated in this bowling ball at 52 miles an hour, absolutely nowhere close. But home plate umpire Eric Backus, perhaps in an attempt to get the game over with, decided to just call it a strike. This made it, pretty obviously in terms of the metrics, the worst call of the year so far, as it was over 4 feet up from the center of the zone. So why didn't Brett challenge it, especially in a 3-1 count where a walk for a backup catcher could do wonders for his stats? Well, he actually couldn't. Per the rules of ABS, you aren't allowed to issue strike zone challenges when a position player is on the mound, meaning that this would have to stand. And while I do understand wanting to move the game along when it's obviously a blowout, I will take some issue with this myself. It just doesn't make sense to me that umpires can just start phoning it in once a position player takes the hill. In fact, at that point, why not just have a mercy rule if you're going to play it that fast and loose? Perhaps they too, like the players in the field, should be forced to lock in and do their job for what is almost always the final inning. Before we move on, I also do want to note here that Brett did end up drawing a walk on the next pitch, so thankfully, it was somewhat moot. Content creator Swilly actually had a good take on the whole situation as well, and I wanted to share it with you guys.
Imagine if a team in the NFL is putting their backups in because, I don't know, they're blowing out a team by 50 points. If there's a catch on the sidelines, are you just not allowed to challenge it anymore because you have backups in? Even though you were able to challenge any time before that in the game? I don't know. This seems very odd. I can't think of another rule in sports that's like this.
Like I said, this is dangerously close to a mercy rule situation, and as a lover of the history of the game, I very much do not want to see that in MLB. Before I go, I also want to give a mini shout out to Joey Wiemer, who tied a modern era record for most plate appearances reaching safely to start a season, per Sarah Langs, with 10. The former top prospect, who is still just 27 years old, already has almost half the number of hits in 2026 as he had in the previous 2 years combined. Just a really cool story, and one certainly worth mentioning here.
Most of the time when we discuss the smartest plays in baseball, we talk about the ones that worked, right? After all, what use is a good idea on the ball field if it doesn't end up resulting in a positive outcome? But once in a while, there are plays that, while they may not count in the scorebook, are so intelligent in their conception that we just have to talk about them, even if they flat out didn't work in their respective situation, which is exactly what's going to be the case here in this video, when we take a look at the efforts of one of the most electric players in baseball, Drew Gilbert, who did something I don't think I've ever seen before in an attempt to save his team, the Giants, from getting walked off in back-to-back games of a doubleheader. Game 1's fiasco, I think, was a bit more bland than Game 2. The Giants scored 2 runs in the top of the first on a Luis Arraez groundout and Casey Schmidt single, and then Philadelphia responded with the Kyle Schwarber home run. And then, for the next 8.5 frames, nothing. Literally, there was not a single additional run scored, though there were some nice defensive plays on either side that helped prevent this, including from Matt Chapman in the bottom of the 4th to nail Adolis Garcia at home, and Brandon Marsh in the top of the 5th to rob a leadoff double from Patrick Bailey. Hopping all the way to the bottom of the 9th, Bryson Stott tied the game on a 1-out triple, and then, after a ground ball was fielded by a drawn-in infield, Justin Crawford beat out a slap shot to Willy Adames to officially seal their first victory of the day. And while this is cool, none of it is what I wanted to principally talk about in this video. Game 2 had much more spread out run scoring, with Philadelphia getting back-to-back home runs in the first from Trey Turner and Kyle Schwarber, 2 players who it's good to see are starting to get going a bit. Then the Giants tallying single runs in the 4th and 5th on 2 sacrifice flies, only to see Philly untie things with a 2-run, 2-out single from Adolis Garcia. That wouldn't last long though either, with Arraez knotting us back up with a base knock in a nearly identical situation as Adolis. We now hop all the way to the top of the 9th, where Jung-Hoo Lee drove in the go-ahead run with 2 outs and runners on the corners, fighting off a 100-mile-per-hour sinker impressively into center field for a single. In the bottom half, Philadelphia would see Kyle Schwarber work himself into the highest pressure situation possible, 3-2 with 2 outs and the tying run on third, then come through with a game-tying double from one knee. In the top half of the 10th, there was probably the most controversial decision on the day. One to not send base runner Gilbert on this single that 100% would have scored him, with the Giants subsequently not managing to push across even a single run, with the next 3 batters striking out, lining out on a great play from Alec Boehm, and then flying out. This takes us to our highlighted play, when in the bottom half, with a runner on third and 1 out, Boehm flew this ball to medium deep center field, where Gilbert angled himself under it and then attempted to catch it as close to the ground as possible, before unleashing a mighty toss to the plate on the fly, with it being well late and the game ending here. I want you to understand what he was trying to do though. By catching that fly ball nearly on the grass, he was hoping to intentionally trick base runner Adolis Garcia into leaving third base early, which, after an appeal, would have resulted in an inning-ending double play had it worked. Now, in this case, it didn't, so like I said in the intro, we're probably not going to be talking about it for very long. But I just had to highlight it here for its ingenuity. And honestly, I think if the fly ball had perhaps been a bit shallower, it may have been more effective. After all, Garcia knew he had all day to leave the bag, so there's no reason he wouldn't be 100% cautious. Even if it were in medium center, or if the runner was slower, there may have been that urge to break early. Which is why we could easily see someone else do this as the season wears on, because it is a great idea in a situation that is already set up to be extremely dire. Congrats to the Phillies on their doubleheader sweep courtesy of 2 walk-offs, becoming the first MLB team to do so since 2004 according to Sarah Langs on Twitter. This perhaps could be a good catalyst for turning around what has been an exceptionally slow season to this point.
Garrett Crochet is one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball. There's no two ways about it. On top of being an all-star 2 years in a row, he finished 2nd in Cy Young and 8th in MVP voting last year, courtesy of a 2.59 ERA, put up in a league-leading 205 1/3 innings pitched, with 255 Ks and a 155 ERA+. And he was certainly good through his first 3 starts of 2026, with a 3.12 ERA and 22 strikeouts in about 17 innings. But, oh man, did he run into a stinker yesterday when he didn't even manage to make it out of the second, giving up 10 earned runs in the process, in a start that was, verifiably, unlike any we had ever seen before, in a profoundly negative capacity. I'm going to take you through each of the batters that he faced in this appearance, which may take a minute, but I think is worth doing. The night began well enough, with him inducing a flyout to center field off the bat of Byron Buxton, the most dangerous hitter in Minnesota's lineup. But things would start going south nearly immediately after, as he gave up back-to-back doubles to Austin Martin and Luke Chisholm. At this point, 2025 Garrett would have probably punched out the next 2 with his overpowering stuff, but that's something he just did not have on the day, giving up an RBI single to Ryan Jeffers on a cutter inside that was just 88 miles an hour. This was a general theme, as pretty much everything he threw was down about a mile to a mile and a half an hour. After a hard-hit flyout off the bat of Josh Bell, one that went 350 feet at an exit velocity of nearly 100 miles an hour, Victor Caratini would draw a walk, then Matt Wallner would get hit by a pitch, with his sinker missing horribly. This is when the Red Sox proceeded to do what they've done for much of 2026 so far, outright fall apart, with Trevor Story making this diving stop up the middle, but then, in turning to throw, literally fire his glove and the ball in the general direction of second base, allowing 2 runs to score in the process. Mercifully, the first would end 1 batter later when Ryan Kreidler popped out to first base. After another relatively easy top of the second, Garrett got back out there and immediately allowed the bases to get loaded with nobody out, on a single from Buxton and then subsequent walks to Martin and Chisholm. This set up Jeffers for his second RBI single of the night. Josh Bell then proceeded to land a haymaker, a 2-run double blasted to right center field that left his bat at 103 miles an hour and traveled nearly 400 feet, making it, at the time, 7-0. At this point so early on in the season, I think a lot of managers may have considered pulling their ace, but Alex Cora decided to stick with his big lefty, letting him fully wear the onslaught, and it would get no better versus Victor Caratini, who managed to put up Minnesota's first home run of the day on a 3-run blast to left field that traveled 423 feet at 106 miles an hour. This had to be the end of the day for Crochet, right? Wrong. Alex kept him out there, and for a moment it looked like he was settling down, retiring Wallner and Brooks Lee on a routine fly ball. Could he actually manage to pitch into the 3rd inning despite having allowed 10 runs at this point? Well, no, because Ryan Kreidler, a guy with a career 138 batting average in 91 games, would then take him deep to the tune of 438 feet with a 109 mile/hour exit velo, officially bringing an end to the day for Garrett. His final line? How about an inning and 2/3 pitched with 9 hits, 10 earned runs, 11 total runs, 3 walks, and 0 strikeouts. As was pointed out by Pitcher Gami on Twitter, this had never been posted before, with him going on to add in a subsequent tweet that no start at any innings pitch total had managed to match that exact combo of hits, runs, walks, and Ks, and that only 28 starts in the history of the sport had seen someone give up 10 runs in less than or equal to 2 innings pitched, and that there's only been 118 recorded instances of somebody having 0 Ks and 10 plus earned runs in an appearance. This made it an all-time historic stinker, one that kicked his ERA on the season all the way up to 7.58. The total of earned runs he gave up in this single appearance, again being 10, was more than 1/6 of what he surrendered all of last season. As you'd probably expect, the Red Sox would go on to lose this one by a final score of 13-6, with this operating as just another disappointing game, and a start to the season that has been chock full of them. We saw a number of notable announcer moments last season, including when the Marlins announcer freaked out on his team's own catcher for allowing a passed ball while he was trying to frame it.
It makes Sandy throw more pitches. See, to me, don't try to frame that pitch. Catch it before you try to frame it.
Or the Tigers radio broadcaster, Dan Dickerson, being caught in a hot mic having some choice words at the idea of doing a game recap after a 15-inning marathon.
I don't have to do a game. Oh, fuck.
You get tired.
Fuck this game recap. Oh, I'm sorry. Was that out loud? 3, 2, 1.
And then my last favorite example, the Mets broadcasting crew crashing out on their own players after yet another sloppy display.
I mean, you might take your whole travel ball squad off the field if something like that happened. Here's a team that is fighting to get to October. What are you going to do in October with an inning like that?
But it's a new season, and so it's time to start detailing some notable calls from this one, with the first standing out to me being from Arizona's team yesterday, when in the process of getting beaten down 17-2, they not only got frustrated, but were seemingly close to tears over the whole thing. The scoring began nearly right away in the top of the first, when Matt Olson crushed a 2-out home run to center field at 430 feet, straight over the big wall out there. Dom Smith added his second of the year 2 frames later, one that traveled an identical 430, this one being more so to straightaway right, after the Diamondbacks cut the lead in half with a missile from Jordan Lawler that came in at 424 feet. Man, balls were really flying on this day. Things started to get away from the D-backs in the top of the 5th, when they gave up 8 runs in this one frame alone, with the biggest blows being 2 RBI doubles from Austin Riley and Michael Harris II. They followed this with 2 more in the 6th on another homer and force out. Nothing much would happen from here until the top of the 9th, when, in a then 11-1 contest, the D-backs brought in backup catcher James McCann to pitch, a true wave-the-white flag moment. And he made no bones about the optics of this, tossing in 40-mile-per-hour epheses en route to giving up 5 earned runs on another homer and couple of doubles. It was versus his second-to-last batter of the night that we would start hearing some real frustration from the Arizona booth, specifically on this single from Ozzie Albies.
And Albies going to tack on one more. They're going to stop. Also.
You can just hear the level of exhaustion in their voices, but that would not be where our notable call came in, instead being on this pitch to Michael Harris.
It's 17-1, and that's ball 1. That's a ball. That was the correct call according to the computers.
The multiple voice cracks, the disgust as he says ball 1, and the indirect frustration with ABS by designating it as the computers, even though you can't challenge when a position player is pitching anyway. It really is a long season, and games like this make it feel even a little bit longer. Harris would shortly after crush a line drive to right field that ended up being hauled in. And then, following an Arizona Chris Paul run in the 9th, the game officially ended with a 17-2 finale, securing one of our first outright routs of the season, along with our first real notable announcer moment. Before we get started, I want to fully acknowledge something. The fact that the Mets blew their game yesterday versus the Nationals in the 8th inning has little to do with the bullpen arm they ended up releasing yesterday, Carl Edwards Jr., and I'm not implying that keeping the lanky righty would have in some way prevented this. I more so saw the timing as darkly ironic, and potentially predictive of future situations they could have avoided by just keeping a player that was essentially free and thriving. You see, Edwards Jr., through 6 innings, had allowed just 3 hits, 1 earned run, 4 walks, and 11 strikeouts before being rewarded with a DFA. For a team that has been dealt the level of injuries that they have to their staff, having someone like Edwards, who made 2 bulk appearances, seemed like a good idea, especially because his raw stuff was actually relatively impressive, especially for somebody serving essentially as a swingman.
Per Thomas Nestico, his heater was actually 12% better than league average in terms of pure stuff, with a whiff percent that was downright elite as well. And if he shortened up his appearances and perhaps allowed him to throw at full intensity, it's totally possible that his off-speed pitches could see some improvement as well. Perhaps dumping, who may become a productive piece for some other team, was a bad omen heading into Thursday's game, and their play on the field reflected it early, getting down 3-0 by the top of the third on a throwing error from pitcher Freddie Peralta, which frankly just encapsulates a lot of the Mets' early season vibes. A subsequent RBI single from Jacob Young, and then a broken bat flare from CJ Abrams. It's not often you see a bat completely shatter like that. To New York's credit, they would answer in the bottom half of the third, with MJ Melendez taking Miles Michaelis deep on a pitch well above the strike zone with 2 guys on, knotting things up at 3. And then, somewhat shockingly, they even managed to take the lead when Peralta settled down to go 6 and Mark Vientos doubled to score Juan Soto in the 6th. This 4-3 cushion would hold until the top of the 8th, when off-season acquisition Luke Weaver came out of the pen, with him immediately getting off to a rough start by giving up a first-pitch single to Luis Garcia Jr. that left his bat at 106 miles an hour. After a force-out, Abrams came up, and proceeded to break the hearts of Mets fans everywhere by crushing the most middle changeup you will ever see, 403 feet to right center field, giving the Nationals a 5-4 advantage. But of course, because it's the Mets, the heartbreak would not conclude here. Soto would lead off the bottom half of this frame with a double, setting things up well, seemingly, for the middle part of the order. They, however, would not only not be able to score him, but not even advance him to third in the process. Then, in the bottom of the 9th, they would give their fanbase one more tiny ounce of hope with a 2-out double from Francisco Alvarez, ahead of Ronnie Mauricio, who had just 1 hit in the entire series, striking out on a 3-2 breaking ball well out of the zone. It's becoming almost a joke at this point to keep making videos about the Mets, but I can't help it when they do stuff like what they did yesterday, releasing who had been a productive arm for them with very interesting underlying numbers, before immediately, ironically, blowing a game in the later innings.
And now, before you guys go, I just want to express my sincere gratitude to every single one of you who makes this possible every day by watching these videos. If you want to go ahead and like as well, there's a cute little baseball icon that pops up. Also, if you have an idea for a similar video or concept as this one, feel free to shoot me an email at basebpoet@gmail.com, and I'll give you a shout out if I end up using your idea. Have a great rest of your day.